Not on your life, Billy growled in fierce affirmation. They walked into Black Diamond with their packs on their backs. It was a scattered village of shabby little cottages, with a main street that was a wallow of black mud from the last late spring rain. The sidewalks bumped up and down in uneven steps and landings. Everything seemed un-American. The names on the strange, dingy shops were unspeakably foreign. The one dingy hotel was run by a Greek. Greeks were everywhere, swarthy men in sea boots and tam-o'-shanters, hatless women in bright colors, hordes of sturdy children, and all speaking in outlandish voices, crying shrilly and vivaciously with the volubility of the Mediterranean. "Huh, this ain't the United States," Billy muttered. Down on the waterfront they found a fish cannery and an asparagus cannery in the height of the busy season, where they looked in vain among the toilers for familiar American faces. Billy picked out the bookkeepers and foremen for Americans. All the rest were Greeks, Italians, and Chinese. At the steamboat wharf, they watched the bright painted Greek boats arriving, discharging their loads of glorious salmon, and departing. New York cut off, as the slough was called, curved to the west and north and flowed into a vast body of water which was the united Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. Beyond the steamboat wharf, the fishing wharves dwindled to stages for the drying of nets, and here, away from the noise and clatter of the alien town, Saxon and Billy took off their packs and rested. The tall, rustling tules grew out of the deep water close to the dilapidated boat landing where they sat. Opposite the town lay a long, flat island, on which a row of ragged poplars leaned against the sky. "Just like in that Dutch windmill picture Mark Hall has," Saxon said. Billy pointed out the mouth of the slough and across the broad reach of water to a cluster of tiny white buildings, behind which, like a glimmering mirage, rolled the low Montezuma hills. "Those houses is Collinsville," he informed her. "The Sacramento River comes in there, and you go up it to Rio Vista and Ileton and Walnut Grove, and all those places Mr. Gunston was tellin' us about. It's all islands and sloughs connectin' clear across and back to the San Joaquin." "Isn't the sun good?" Saxon yawned. "And how quiet it is here, so short a distance away from those strange foreigners. And to think, in the cities right now men are beating and killing each other for jobs." Now and again an overland passenger train rushed by in the distance, echoing along the background of foothills of Mt. Diablo, which bulked, twin-peaked, green-crinkled against the sky. Then the slumberous quiet would fall, to be broken by the far call of a foreign tongue or by a gasoline fishing boat chugging in through the mouth of the slough. Not 100 feet away, anchored close in the tules, lay a beautiful white yacht. Despite its tininess it looked broad and comfortable. Smoke was rising forward from its stovepipe. On its stern in gold letters they read Roma. On top of the cabin, basking in the sunshine, lay a man and woman, the latter with a pink scarf around her head. The man was reading aloud from a book while she sewed. Beside them sprawled a fox terrier. "Gosh, they don't have to stick around cities to be happy," Billy commented. A Japanese came on deck from the cabin, sat down forward, and began picking a chicken. The feathers floated away in a long line toward the mouth of the slough. "Oh look," Saxon pointed in her excitement. "He's fishing, and the line is fast to his toe." The man had dropped the book face downward on the cabin and reached for the line, while the woman looked up from her sewing, and the terrier began to bark. In came the line, hand under hand, and at the end a big catfish. When this was removed and the line rebaited and dropped overboard, the man took a turn around his toe and went on reading. A Japanese came down on the landing stage beside Saxon and Billy and hailed the yacht. He carried parcels of meat and vegetables, one coat pocket bulged with letters, the other with morning papers. In response to his hail, the Japanese on the yacht stood up with the part-plucked chicken. The man said something to him, put aside the book, got into the white skiff lying astern and rowed to the landing. As he came alongside the stage, he pulled in his oars, caught hold, and said good morning genially. "Why, I know you," Saxon said impulsively to Billy's amazement. "You are—" Here she broke off in confusion. "Go on," the man said, smiling reassurance. "You are Jack Hastings, I'm sure of it. I used to see your photograph in the papers all the time you were war correspondent in the Japanese-Russian War. You've written lots of books, though I've never read them." "Right you are," he ratified. "And what's your name?" Saxon introduced herself and Billy, and when she noted the writer's observant eye on their packs, she sketched the pilgrimage they were on. The farm in the Valley of the Moon evidently caught his fancy, and though the Japanese and his parcels were safely in the skiff, Hastings still lingered. When Saxon spoke of Carmel, he seemed to know everybody in Hall's crowd, and when he heard they were intending to go to Rio Vista, his invitation was immediate. "Why, we're going that way ourselves inside an hour as soon as slack water comes," he exclaimed. "It's just the thing, come on board. We'll be there by 4 this afternoon if there's any wind at all. Come on, my wife's on board and Mrs. Hall is one of her best chums. We've been away to South America, just got back, or you'd have seen us in Carmel. Hal wrote to us about the pair of you." It was the second time in her life that Saxon had been in a small boat, and the Roma was the first yacht she had ever been on board. The writer's wife, whom he called Clara, welcomed them heartily, and Saxon lost no time in falling in love with her, and in being fallen in love with in return. So strikingly did they resemble each other that Hastings was not many minutes in calling attention to it. He made them stand side by side, studied their eyes and mouths and ears, compared their hands, their hair, their ankles, and swore that his fondest dream was shattered, namely, that when Clara had been made the mould was broken. On Clara's suggestion that it might have been pretty much the same mould, they compared histories. Both were of the pioneer stock. Clara's mother, like Saxon's, had crossed the plains with ox teams, and like Saxon's had wintered in Salt Intake City, in fact, had with her sisters opened the first Gentile school in that Mormon stronghold, and if Saxon's father had helped raise the Bear Flag Rebellion at Sonoma, it was at Sonoma that Clara's father had mustered in for the War of the Rebellion and ridden as far east with his troop as Salt Lake City, of which place he had been provost marshal when the Mormon trouble flared up. To complete it all, Clara fetched from the cabin an ukulele of boa wood that was the twin to Saxon's, and together they sang Honolulu Tomboy. Hastings decided to eat dinner. He called the midday meal by its old-fashioned name, before sailing, and down below Saxon was surprised and delighted by the measure of comfort in so tiny a cabin. There was just room for Billy to stand upright. A centerboard case divided the room in half longitudinally, and to this was attached the hinged table from which they ate. Low bunks that ran the full cabin length, upholstered in cheerful green, served as seats. A curtain, easily attached by hooks between the centerboard case and the roof, at night screened Mrs. Hastings' sleeping quarters. On the opposite side the 2 Japanese bunked, while forward under the deck was the galley. So small was it that there was just room beside it for the cook, who was compelled by the low deck to squat on his hands. The other Japanese, who had brought the parcels on board, waited on the table. "They are looking for a ranch in the Valley of the Moon," Hastings concluded his explanation of the pilgrimage to Clara. "Oh, don't you know?" she cried, but was silenced by her husband. "Hush," he said peremptorily, then turned to their guests. "Listen, there's something in that Valley of the Moon idea, but I won't tell you what. It is a secret. Now we've a ranch in Sonoma Valley about 8 miles from the very town of Sonoma where you 2 girls' fathers took up soldiering, and if you ever come to our ranch you'll learn the secret. Oh, believe me, it's connected with your Valley of the Moon. Isn't it, mate?" This last was the mutual name he and Clara had for each other. She smiled and laughed and nodded her head. "You might find our valley the very one you are looking for," she said. But Hastings shook his head at her to check further speech. She turned to the fox terrier and made it speak for a piece of meat. "Her name's Peggy," she told Saxon. "We had 2 Irish terriers down in the South Seas, brother and sister, but they died. We called them Peggy and Possum, so she's named after the original Peggy." Billy was impressed by the ease with which the Roma was operated. While they lingered at table, at a word from Hastings the 2 Japanese had gone on deck. Billy could hear them throwing down the halyards, casting off gaskets, and heaving the anchor short on the tiny winch. In several minutes one called down that everything was ready, and all went on deck. Hoisting mainsail and jigger was a matter of minutes. Then the cook and cabin boy broke out anchor, and while one hove it up the other hoisted the jib. Hastings at the wheel trimmed the sheet. The Roma paid off, filled her sails, slightly heeling, and slid across the smooth water and out the mouth of New York Slough. The Japanese called the halyards and went below for their own dinner. "The flood is just beginning to make," said Hastings, pointing to a striped spar buoy that was slightly tipping upstream on the edge of the channel. The tiny white houses of Collinsville, which they were nearing, disappeared behind a low island, though the Montezuma Hills, with their long, low, restful lines, slumbered on the horizon apparently as far away as ever. As the Roma passed the mouth of Montezuma Slough and entered the Sacramento, they came upon Collinsville close at hand. Saxon clapped her hands. "It's like a lot of toy houses," she said, "cut out of cardboard, and those hilly fields are just painted up behind." They passed many arks and houseboats of fishermen moored among the tules, and the women and children, like the men in the boats, were dark-skinned, black-eyed, foreign. As they proceeded up the river, they began to encounter dredges at work, biting out mouthfuls of the sandy river bottom and heaping it on top of the huge levees. Great mats of willow brush, hundreds of yards in length, were laid on top of the river slope of the levees and held in place by steel cables and thousands of cubes of cement. The willows soon sprouted, Hastings told them, and by the time the mats were rotted away, the sand was held in place by the roots of the trees. It must cost like Sam Hill, Billy observed. But the land is worth it, Hastings explained. This island land is the most productive in the world. This section of California is like Holland. You wouldn't think it, but this water we're sailing on is higher than the surface of the islands. They're like leaky boats, calking, patching, pumping night and day and all the time. But it pays, it pays. Except for the dredgers, the fresh-piled sand, the dense willow thickets, and always empty. Diablo to the south, nothing was to be seen. Occasionally a river steamboat passed, and blue herons flew into the trees. It must be very lonely, Saxon remarked. Hastings laughed and told her she would change her mind later. Much he related to them of the river lands, and after a while he got on the subject of tenant farming. Saxon had started him by speaking of the land-hungry Anglo-Saxons. Land hogs, he snapped. That's our record in this country. As one old Reuben told a professor of an agricultural experiment station, they ain't no sense in tryin' to teach me farmin'. I know all about it. Ain't I worked out 3 farms? It was his kind that destroyed New England. Back there great sections are relapsing to wilderness. In one state at least the deer have increased until they are a nuisance. There are abandoned farms by the tens of thousands. I've gone over the lists of them, farms in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, offered for sale on easy payment. The prices asked wouldn't pay for the improvements, while the land, of course, is thrown in for nothing. And the same thing is going on in one way or another, the same land robbing and hogging over the rest of the country, down in Texas, in Missouri and Kansas, out here in California. Take tenant farming. I know a ranch in my county where the land was worth $125 an acre, and it gave its return at that valuation. When the old man died, the son leased it to a Portuguese and went to live in the city. In 5 years the Portuguese skimmed the cream and dried up the udder. The second lease with another Portuguese for 3 years gave 1/4 the former return. No third Portuguese appeared to offer to lease it. There wasn't anything left. That ranch was worth $50,000 when the old man died. In the end the son got $11,000 for it. Why, I've seen land that paid 12%. That, after the skimming of a 5 years lease, paid only 1.25%. It's the same in our valley, Mrs. Hastings supplemented. All the old farms are dropping into ruin. Take the Ebel place, mate. Her husband nodded emphatic endorsement. When we used to know it, it was a perfect paradise of a farm. There were dams and lakes, beautiful meadows, lush hayfields, red hills of great plans, hundreds of acres of good pasture, heavenly groves of pines and oaks, a stone winery, stone barns, grounds. Oh, I couldn't describe it in hours. When Mrs. Bell died, the family scattered and the leasing began. It's a ruin today. The trees have been cut and sold for firewood. There's only a little bit of the vineyard that isn't abandoned, just enough to make wine for the present Italian lessees, who are running a poverty-stricken milk ranch on the leavings of the soil. I rode over it last year and cried. The beautiful orchard is a horror. The grounds have gone back to the wild. Just because they didn't keep the gutters cleaned out, the rain trickled down and dry-rotted the timbers, and the big stone barn is caved in. The same with part of the winery. The other part is used for stabling the cows. And the house, words can't describe. It's become a profession, Hastings went on. The movers, they lease, clean out and gut a place in several years and then move on. They're not like the foreigners, the Chinese and Japanese and the rest. In the main they're a lazy, vagabond, poor white sort, who do nothing else but skin the soil and move, skin the soil and move. Now take the Portuguese and Italians in our country. They are different. They arrive in the country without a penny and work for others of their countrymen until they've learned the language and their way about. Now they're not movers. What they are after is land of their own, which they will love and care for and conserve. But in the meantime, how to get it? Saving wages is slow. There is a quicker way. They lease. In 3 years they can gut enough out of somebody else's land to set themselves up for life. It is sacrilege, a veritable rape of the land, but what of it? It's the way of the United States. He turned suddenly on Billy. Look here, Roberts, you and your wife are looking for your bit of land. You want it bad, now take my advice. It's cold, hard advice. Become a tenant farmer. Lease some place where the old folks have died and the country isn't good enough for the sons and daughters. Then gut it, wring the last dollar out of the soil, repair nothing, and in 3 years you'll have your own place paid for. Then turn over a new leaf and love your soil. Nourish it. Every dollar you feed it will return you too, and have nothing scrub about the place. If it's a horse, a cow, a pig, a chicken, or a blackberry vine, see that it's thoroughbred. But it's wicked, Saxon wrung out, it's wicked advice. We live in a wicked age, Hastings countered, smiling grimly. This wholesale land skinning is the national crime of the United States today, nor would I give your husband such advice if I weren't absolutely certain that the land he skins would be skinned by some Portuguese or Italian if he refused. As fast as they arrive and settle down, they send for their sisters and their cousins and their aunts. If you were thirsty, if a warehouse were burning and beautiful Rhine wine were running to waste, would you stay your hand from scooping a drink? Well, the national warehouse is afire in many places, and no end of the good things are running to waste. Help yourself. If you don't, the immigrants will. Oh, you don't know him, Mrs. Hastings hurried to explain. He spends all his time on the ranch in conserving the soil. There are over 1,000 acres of woods alone, and though he thins and forests like a surgeon, he won't let a tree be chopped without his permission. He's even planted 100,000 trees. He's always draining and ditching to stop erosion, and experimenting with pasture grasses. And every little while he buys some exhausted adjoining ranch and starts building up the soil. Wherefore I know what I'm talking about, Hastings broke in. And my advice holds. I love the soil yet tomorrow, things being as they are, and if I were poor I'd gut 500 acres in order to buy 25 for myself. When you get into Sonoma Valley, look me up, and I'll put you onto the whole game and both ends of it. I'll show you construction as well as destruction. When you find a farm doomed to be gutted anyway, why jump in and do it yourself? Yes, and he mortgaged himself to the eyes, laughed Mrs. Hastings, to keep 500 acres of woods out of the hands of the charcoal burners. Ahead on the left bank of the Sacramento, just at the fading end of the Montezuma Hills, Rio Vista appeared. The Roma slipped through the smooth water past steamboat wharves, landing stages, and warehouses. The two Japanese went forward on deck. At command of Hastings, the jib ran down, and he shot the Roomer into the wind, losing way until he called, "Let go the hook." The anchor went down, and the yacht swung to it, so close to shore that the skiff lay under overhanging willows. "Farther up the river we tie to the bank," Mrs. Hastings said, "so that when you wake in the morning you find the branches of trees sticking down into the cabin." "Ooh," Saxon murmured, pointing to a lump on her wrist. "Look at that, a mosquito." "Pretty early for them," Hastings said, "but later on they're terrible. I've seen them so thick I couldn't back the jib against them." Saxon was not nautical enough to appreciate his hyperbole, though Billy grinned. "There are no mosquitoes in the Valley of the Moon," she said. "No, never," said Mrs. Hastings, whose husband began immediately to regret the smallness of the cabin, which prevented him from offering sleeping accommodations. An automobile bumped along on top of the levee, and the young boys and girls in it cried, "Oh, you kid," to Saxon and Billy and Hastings, who was rowing them ashore in the skiff. Hastings called, "Oh, you kid," back to them, and Saxon, pleasuring in the boyishness of his sunburned face, was reminded of the boyishness of Mark Hall and his Carmel crowd. Chapter 12. Crossing the Sacramento on an old-fashioned ferry a short distance above Rio Vista, Saxon and Billy entered the river country. From the top of the levee she got her revelation. Beneath, lower than the river, stretched broad, flat land, far as the eye could see. Roads ran in every direction, and she saw countless farmhouses of which she had never dreamed when sailing on the lonely river a few feet the other side of the willowy fringe. 3 weeks they spent among the rich farm islands, which heaped up levees and pumped day and night to keep afloat. It was a monotonous land, with an unvarying richness of soil and with only one landmark, Mt. Diablo, ever to be seen, sleeping in the midday azure, limping its crinkled mass against the sunset sky, or forming like a dream out of the silver dawn. Sometimes on foot, often by launch, they crisscrossed and threaded the river region as far as the peat lands of the Middle River, down the San Joaquin to Antioch, and up Georgiana Slough to Walnut Grove on the Sacramento. And it proved a foreign land. The workers of the soil teemed by thousands, yet Saxon and Billy knew what it was to go a whole day without finding anyone who spoke English. They encountered, sometimes in whole villages, Chinese, Japanese, Italians, Portuguese, Swiss, Hindus, Koreans, Norwegians, Danes, French, Armenians, Slavs, almost every nationality save American. One American they found on the lower reaches of Georgiana who eked an illicit existence by fishing with traps. Another American who spouted blood and destruction on all political subjects was an itinerant bee farmer. At Walnut Grove, bustling with life, the few Americans consisted of the storekeeper, the saloon-keeper, the butcher, the keeper of the drawbridge, and the ferryman. Yet 2 thriving towns were in Walnut Grove, one Chinese, one Japanese. Most of the land was owned by Americans, who lived away from it and were continually selling it to the foreigners. A riot or a merrymaking, they could not tell which was taking place in the Japanese town, as Saxon and Billy steamed out on the Apache, bound for Sacramento. "We're set and on the stoop," Billy railed. "Pretty soon they'll crowd us off of that." "There won't be any stoop in the Valley of the Moon," Saxon cheered him. But he was inconsolable, remarking bitterly, "And they ain't one of them damn foreigners that can handle 4 horses like me." "But they can everlastingly farm," he added. And Saxon, looking at his moody face, was suddenly reminded of a lithograph she had seen in her childhood. It was of a Plains Indian in paint and feathers, astride his horse and gazing with wondering eye at a railroad train rushing along a fresh-made track. The Indian had passed, she remembered, before the tide of new life that brought the railroad. And were Billy and his kind doomed to pass, she pondered, before this new tide of life, amazingly industrious, that was flooding in from Asia and Europe? At Sacramento they stopped 2 weeks, where Billy drove team and earned the money to put them along on their travels. Also, life in Oakland and Carmel, close to the salt edge of the coast, had spoiled them for the interior. Too warm was their verdict of Sacramento, and they followed the railroad west, through a region of swampland, to Daviesville. Here they were lured aside, and to the north to Pretty Woodland, where Billy drove team for a fruit farm, and where Saxon wrung from him a reluctant consent for her to work a few days in the fruit harvest. She made an important and mystifying secret of what she intended doing with her earnings, and Billy teased her about it until the matter passed from his mind. Nor did she tell him of a money order enclosed with a certain blue slip of paper in a letter to Bud Struthers. They began to suffer from the heat. Billy declared they had strayed out of the blanket climate. "There are no redwoods here," Saxon said. "We must go west toward the coast. It is there we'll find the Valley of the Moon." From Woodland they swung west and south along the county roads to the fruit paradise of Vacaville. Here Billy picked fruit, then drove team, and here Saxon received a letter and a tiny express package from Bud Struthers. When Billy came into camp from the day's work, she bade him stand still and shut his eyes. For a few seconds she fumbled and did something to the breast of his cotton work shirt. Once he felt a slight prick, as of a pinpoint, and grunted, while she laughed and bullied him to continue keeping his eyes shut. "Close your eyes and give me a kiss," she sang, "and then I'll show you what is." She kissed him, and when he looked down he saw, pinned to his shirt, the gold medals he had pawned the day they had gone to the moving picture show, and received their inspiration to return to the land. "You darned kid," he exclaimed as he caught her to him, "so that's what you blew your fruit money in on, and I never guessed, come here to you." And thereupon she suffered the pleasant mastery of his brawn, and was hugged and wrestled with until the coffee pot boiled over, and she darted from him to the rescue. "I kinda always been a mite proud of 'em," he confessed as he rolled his after-supper cigarette. "They take me back to my kid days when I amatored it to beat the band. I was some kid in them days, believe ma. But say, d'ye know they'd clean slipped my recollection. Oakland's 1,000 years away from you and me, and 10,000 miles. "Then this will bring you back to it," Saxon said, opening Bud's letter and reading it aloud. Bud had taken it for granted that Billy knew the wind-up of the strike, so he devoted himself to the details as to which men had got back their jobs, and which had been blacklisted. To his own amazement he had been taken back, and was now driving Billy's horses. Still more amazing was the further information he had to impart. The old foreman of the West Oakland stables had died, and since then 2 other foremen had done nothing but make messes of everything. The point of all which was that the boss had spoken that day to Bud, regretting the disappearance of Billy. "Don't make no mistake," Bud wrote. "The boss is onto all your curves. I bet he knows every scab you slugged. Just the same he says to me, 'Struthers, if you ain't at liberty to give me his address, just write yourself and tell him for me to come a-running. I'll give him $125 a month to take hold the stables.'" Saxon waited with well-concealed anxiety when the letter was finished. Billy, stretched out, leaning on one elbow, blew a meditative ring of smoke. His cheap workshirt, incongruously brilliant with the gold of the medals that flashed in the firelight, was open in front, showing the smooth skin and splendid swell of chest. He glanced around, at the blankets bowered in a green screen and waiting, at the campfire and the black and battered coffee pot, at the well-worn hatchet, half buried in a tree trunk, and lastly at Saxon. His eyes embraced her, then into them came a slow expression of inquiry, but she offered no help. "Well," he uttered finally, "all you gotta do is write Bud Struthers and tell 'm not on the boss's ugly tintype. And while you're about it, I'll send the money to get my watch out. You work out the interest, the overcoat can stay there and rot." But they did not prosper in the interior heat. They lost weight. The resilience went out of their minds and bodies. As Billy expressed it, their silk was frazzled, so they shouldered their packs and headed west across the wild mountains. In the Berryessa Valley, the shimmering heat waves made their eyes ache, and their heads, so that they traveled on in the early morning and late afternoon. Still west they headed over more mountains to beautiful Napa Valley. The next valley beyond was Sonoma, where Hastings had invited them to his ranch, and here they would have gone had not Billy chanced upon a newspaper item which told of the writer's departure to cover some revolution that was breaking out somewhere in Mexico. "We'll see 'em later on," Billy said as they turned northwest through the vineyards and orchards of Napa Valley. "We're like that millionaire Bert used to sing about, except it's time that we've got to burn. Any direction is as good as any other, only west is best." 3 times in the Napa Valley Billy refused work. Past St. Helena, Saxon hailed with joy the unmistakable redwoods they could see growing up the small canyons that penetrated the western wall of the valley. At Calistoga, at the end of the railroad, they saw the 6-horse stages leaving for Middletown and Lower Lake. They debated their route. That way led to Lake County and not toward the coast, so Saxon and Billy swung west through the mountains to the valley of the Russian River, coming out at Healdsburg. They lingered in the hop fields on the rich bottoms, where Billy scorned to pick hops alongside of Indians, Japanese and Chinese. "I couldn't work alongside of 'em an hour before I'd be knocking their blocks off," he explained. "Besides, this Russian river's some nifty, let's pitch camp and go swimming." So they idled their way north up the broad, fertile valley, so happy that they forgot that work was ever necessary, while the Valley of the Moon was a golden dream, remote, but sure some day of realization. At Cloverdale, Billy fell into luck. A combination of sickness and mischance found the stage stables short a driver. Each day the train disgorged passengers for the geysers, and Billy, as if accustomed to it all his life, took the reins of 6 horses and drove a full load over the mountains in stage time. The second trip he had Saxon beside him on the high box seat. By the end of 2 weeks the regular driver was back. Billy declined a stable job, took his wages and continued north. Saxon had adopted a fox terrier puppy and named him Possum, after the dog Mrs. Hastings had told them about. So young was he that he quickly became footsore, and she carried him until Billy perched him on top of his pack and grumbled that Possum was chewing his back hair to a frazzle. They passed through the painted vineyards of Asti at the end of the great picking, and entered Ukiah drenched to the skin by the first winter rain. "Say," Billy said, "you remember the way the Roma just skated along? Well, this summer's done the same thing, gone by on wheels, and now it's up to us to find some place to winter. This Ukiah looks like a pretty good burg. We'll get a room tonight and dry out. And tomorrow I'll hustle around to the stables, and if I locate anything we can rent a shack and have all winter to think about where we'll go next year." Chapter 13. The winter proved much less exciting than the one spent in Carmel, and keenly as Saxon had appreciated the Carmel folk, she now appreciated them more keenly than ever. In Ukiah she formed nothing more than superficial acquaintances. Here people were more like those of the working class she had known in Oakland, or else they were merely wealthy and herded together in automobiles. There was no democratic artist colony that pursued fellowship disregardful of the caste of wealth. Yet it was a more enjoyable winter than any she had spent in Oakland. Billy had failed to get regular employment, so she saw much of him, and they lived a prosperous and happy hand-to-mouth existence in the tiny cottage they rented. As extra man at the biggest livery stable, Billy's spare time was so great that he drifted into horse trading. It was hazardous, and more than once he was broke, but the table never wanted for the best of steak and coffee, nor did they stint themselves for clothes. "Them blamed farmers, I gotta pass it to 'em," Billy grinned one day when he had been particularly bested in a horse deal. "They won't tear under the wings, the sons of guns. In the summer they take in boarders, and in the winter they make a good livin' doin' each other up at traddin' horses. And I just want to tell you, Saxon, they've sure shown me a few. And I'm gettin' tough under the wings myself. I'll never tear again so as you can notice it, which means one more trade learned for yours truly. I can make a livin' anywhere now traddin' horses." Often Billy had Saxon out on spare saddle horses from the stable, and his horse deals took them on many trips into the surrounding country. Likewise she was with him when he was driving horses to sell on commission, and in both their minds independently arose a new idea concerning their pilgrimage. Billy was the first to broach it. "I run into an outfit the other day that's stored in town," he said, "and it's kept me thinkin' ever since. Ain't no use tryin' to get you to guess it because you can't. I'll tell you the swellest wagon campin' outfit anybody ever heard of. First of all, the wagon's a Peacherino, strong as they make 'em. It was made to order upon Puget Sound, and it was tested out all the way down here. No load and no road can strain it. The guy had consumption that had it built. A doctor and a cook traveled with him till he passed in his checks here in Ukiah 2 years ago. But say, if you could see it. Every kind of a contrivance, a place for everything, a regular home on wheels. Now if we could get that and a couple of plugs, we could travel like kings and laugh at the weather. Oh, Billy, it's just what I've been dreamin' all winter. It would be ideal. And, well, sometimes on the road I'm sure you can't help forgetting what a nice little wife you've got. And with a wagon I could have all kinds of pretty clothes along. Billy's blue eyes glowed a caress, cloudy and warm, as he said quietly, I've been thinkin' about that. And you can carry a rifle and shotgun and fishing poles and everything, she rushed along. And a good big axe man size instead of that hatchet you're always complaining about. And Possum can lift up his legs and rest. But suppose you can't buy it, how much do they want? $150 big bucks, he answered. But dirt cheap at that. It's givin' it away. I tell you that rig wasn't built for a cent less than 400, and I know wagon work in the dark. Now if I can put through that dicker with Caswell's 6 horses, say I just got onto that horse buyer today. If he buys 'em, who do you think he'll ship 'em to? To the boss, right to the West Oakland stables. I'm goin' to get you to write to him. Travelin', as we're goin' to, I can pick up bargains. And if the boss'll talk, I can make the regular horse buyer's commissions. He'll have to trust me with a lot of money, though, which most likely he won't, knowin' all his scabs I beat up. If he could trust you to run his stable, I guess he isn't afraid to let you handle his money, Saxon said. Billy shrugged his shoulders in modest dubiousness. Well, anyway, as I was sayin', if I can sell Caswell's 6 horses, why we can stand off this month's bills and buy the wagon. But horses, Saxon queried anxiously. They'll come later, if I have to take a regular job for 2 or 3 months. The only trouble with that be that it'd run us pretty well along into summer before we could pull out. But come on downtown, and I'll show you the outfit right now. Saxon saw the wagon and was so infatuated with it that she lost a night's sleep from sheer insomnia of anticipation. Then Caswell's 6 horses were sold, the month's bills held over, and the wagon became theirs. One rainy morning 2 weeks later, Billy had scarcely left the house, to be gone on an all-day trip into the country after horses, when he was back again. Come on, he called to Saxon from the street. Get your things on and come along, I want to show you something. He drove downtown to a board stable, and took her through to a large, roofed enclosure in the rear. There he led to her a span of sturdy dappled chestnuts, with cream-coloured manes and tails. Oh, the beauties, Saxon cried, resting her cheek against the velvet muzzle of one, while the other roguishly nuzzled for a share. Ain't they, though? Billy revelled, leading them up and down before her admiring gaze. 1,350 each, and they don't look the weight they're that slick put together. I couldn't believe it myself till I put 'em on the scales. 2,707 pounds the 2 of 'em. And I tried 'em out, that was 2 days ago. Good dispositions, no faults and true pullers, automobile broken all the rest. I'd back 'em to outpull any team of their weight I ever seen. Say, how'd they look hooked up to that wagon of urn? Saxon visioned the picture, and shook her head slowly in a reaction of regret. 300 spot cash buys 'em, Billy went on. And that's bedrock. The owner wants the money so bad he's droolin' for it. Just gotta sell and sell quick. And Saxon, honest to God, that pair'd fetch 500 at auction down in the city. Both mares, full sisters, 5 and 6 years old, registered Belgian sire, out of a heavy standard-bred mare that I know. 300 takes 'em, and I got the refusal for 3 days. Saxon's regret changed to indignation. Oh, why did you show them to me? We haven't any 300 and you know it. All I've got in the house is $6 and you haven't that much. Maybe you think that's all I brought you downtown for, he replied enigmatically. Well, it ain't. He paused, licked his lips, and shifted his weight uneasily from one leg to the other. Now you listen till I get all done before you say anything. Ready? She nodded. Won't open your mouth. This time she obediently shook her head. Well, it's this way, he began haltingly. They's a youngster come up from Frisco, young Sando they call him, and the pride of Telegraph Hill. He's the real goods of a heavyweight, and he was to fight Montana Red Saturday night. Only Montana Red, just in a little trainin' bout, snapped his forearm yesterday. The managers has kept it quiet. Now here's the proposition. Lots of tickets sold and there'll be a big crowd Saturday night. At the last moment, so as not to disappoint 'em, they'll spring me to take Montana's place. I'm the dark horse. Nobody knows me, not even young Sando. He's come up since my time. I'll be a rube fighter. I can fight as Horse Roberts. Now wait a minute, the winner'll pull down 300 big round iron dollars. Wait, I'm tellin' you, it's a lead pipe cinch, it's like robbing a corpse. Sando's got all the heart in the world, regular knockdown and drag out and hang on fighter. I've followed him in the papers, but he ain't clever. I'm slow, all right, but I'm clever and I got a haymaker in each arm. I got Sando's number and I know it. Now you got the say-so in this. If you say yes, the nags is earn. If you say no, then it's all bets off and everything all right, and I'll take to harness washin' at the stable so as to buy a couple of plugs. Remember, they'll only be plugs though, but don't look at me while you're mackin' up your mind. Keep your lamps on the horses. It was with painful indecision that she looked at the beautiful animals. Their names is Hazel and Hattie, Billy put in a sly wedge. If we get 'em, we could call it the Double H outfit. But Saxon forgot the team and could only see Billy's frightfully bruised body the night he fought the Chicago Terror. She was about to speak when Billy, who had been hanging on her lips, broke in. Just hitch 'em up to our wagon in your mind and look at the outfit. You got to go some to beat it. But you're not in training, Billy, she said suddenly and without having intended to say it. Huh, he snorted. I've been in half trainin' for the last year. My legs is like iron. They'll hold me up as long as I've got a punch left in my arms, and I always have that. Besides, I won't let make a long fight. He's a man-eater and man-eaters is my meat. I eat 'em alive. It's the clever boys with the stamina and endurance that I can't put away. But this young Sando's my meat. I'll get maybe in the 3rd or 4th round, you know, time in a rush and hand it 'em just as easy. It's a lead pipe cinch, I tell you. Honest to God, Saxon, it's a shame to take the money. But I hate to think of you all battered up, she temporized. If I didn't love you so, it might be different, and then too you might get hurt. Billy laughed in contemptuous pride of youth and brawn. You won't know I've been in a fight, except that we'll own Hazel and Hattie there. And besides, Saxon, I just gotta stick my fist in somebody's face once in a while. You know I can go for months peaceable and gentle as a lamb, and then my knuckles actually begin to itch to land on something. Now it's a whole lot sensibler to land on young Sando and get 300 for it, than to land on some hayseed and get hauled up and fined before some justice of the peace. Now take another squint at Hazel and Hattie. They're regular farm furniture, good to breed from when we get to that Valley of the Moon. And they're heavy enough to turn right into the ploughing, too. The evening of the fight at 8:15, Saxon parted from Billy. At 9:15, with hot water, ice and everything ready in anticipation, she heard the gate click and Billy's step come up the porch. She had agreed to the fight much against her better judgment, and had regretted her consent every minute of the hour she had just waited, so that, as she opened the front door, she was expectant of any sort of a terrible husband wreck. But the Billy she saw was precisely the Billy she had parted from. There was no fight, she cried in so evident disappointment that he laughed. They was all yellin', fake, when I left and wantin' their money back. Well, I've got you, she laughed, leading him in, though secretly she sighed farewell to Hazel and Hattie. I stopped by the way to get something for you that you've been wantin' some time, Billy said casually. Shut your eyes and open your hand, and when you open your eyes you'll find it grand, he chanted. Into her hand something was laid that was very heavy and very cold, and when her eyes opened, she saw it was a stack of 15 $20 gold pieces. I told you it was like talkin' money from a corpse, he exulted, as he emerged grinning from the whirlwind of punches, whacks and hugs in which she had enveloped him. They wasn't no fight at all. Do you want to know how long it lasted? Just 27 seconds less 'n half a minute. And how many blows struck? 1, and it was me that done it. Here, I'll show you. It was just like this, a regular scream. Billy had taken his place in the middle of the room, slightly crouching, chin tucked against the sheltering left shoulder, fists closed, elbows in so as to guard left side and abdomen, and forearms close to the body. It's the first round, he pictured. Gong sounded and we've shook hands. Of course, seein' as it's a long fight and we've never seen each other in action, we ain't in no rush. We're just feelin' each other out and fiddlin' around. 17 seconds like that, not a blow struck. Nothin', and then it's all off with the big Swede. It takes some time to tell it, but it happened in a jiffy, in less than a tenth of a second. I wasn't expectin' it myself. We're awful close together. His left glove ain't a foot from my jaw and my left glove ain't a foot from his. He feints with his right and I know it's a feint and just hunch up my left shoulder a bit and feint with my right. That draws his guard over just about an inch and I see my open in. My left ain't got a foot to travel. I don't draw it back none. I start it from where it is, corkscrewing around his right guard and pivoting at the waist to put the weight of my shoulder into the punch. And it connects. Square on the point of the chin sideways. He drops deado. I walk back to my corner and, honest to God, Saxon, I can't help giggling a little. It was that easy. The referee stands over him and counts him out. He never quivers. The audience don't know what to make of it and sits paralyzed. His seconds carry him to his corner and set him on the stool, but they gotta hold him up. 5 minutes afterward he opens his eyes, but he ain't seeing nothing. They're glassy. 5 minutes more and he stands up. They got to help hold him, his legs jivin' under him like they was sausages, and the seconds has to help him through the ropes, and they go down the aisle to his dressing room helpin'. And the crowd beginning to yell fake and want its money back. 27 seconds, one punch, a spankin' pair of horses for the best wife Billy Roberts ever had in his long experience. All of Saxon's old physical worship of her husband revived and doubled on itself many times. He was in all truth a hero, worthy to be of that wing-helmeted company leaping from the beaked boats upon the bloody English sands. The next morning he was awakened by her lips pressed on his left hand. "Hey, what are you doing?" he demanded. "Kissing Hazel and Hattie good morning," she answered demurely. "And now I'm going to kiss you good morning, and just where did your punch land? Show me." Billy complied, touching the point of her chin with his knuckles. With both her hands on his arm, she shoved it back and tried to draw it forward sharply in similitude of a punch. But Billy withstrained her. "Wait," he said, "you don't want to knock your jaw off, I'll show you. 1/4 of an inch will do." And at a distance of 1/4 of an inch from her chin, he administered the slightest flick of a tap. On the instant Saxon's brain snapped with a white flash of light, while her whole body relaxed, numb and weak, volitionless, sad her vision reeled and blurred. The next instant she was herself again, in her eyes terror and understanding. "And it was at her foot that you struck him," she murmured in a voice of awe. "Yes, and with the weight of my shoulders behind it," Billy laughed. "Oh, that's nothing. Here, let me show you something else." He searched out her solar plexus, and did no more than snap his middle finger against it. This time she experienced a simple paralysis, accompanied by a stoppage of breath, but with a brain and vision that remained perfectly clear. In a moment, however, all the unwanted sensations were gone. "Solar plexus," Billy elucidated. "Imagine what it's like when the other fellow lifts a wallop to it all the way from his knees. That's the punch that won the championship of the world for Bob Fitzsimmons." Saxon shuddered, then resigned herself to Billy's playful demonstration of the weak points in the human anatomy. He pressed the tip of a finger into the middle of her forearm, and she knew excruciating agony. On either side of her neck at the base, he dented gently with his thumbs, and she felt herself quickly growing unconscious. "That's one of the death touches of the Japs," he told her and went on, accompanying grips and holds with a running exposition. "Here's the toe hold that Notch defeated Hackenschmidt with. I learned it from Farmer Burns. And here's a half Nelson. And here's you mackin' roughhouse at a dance, and I'm the floor manager, and I gotta put you out." One hand grasped her wrist, the other hand passed around and under her forearm and grasped his own wrist. And at the first hint of pressure, she felt that her arm was a pipe stem about to break. "That's called the come along. And here's the strong arm. A boy can down a man with it. And if you ever get into a scrap and the other fellow gets your nose between his teeth, you don't want to lose your nose, do you? Well, this is what you do, quick as a flash." Involuntarily she closed her eyes as Billy's thumb ends pressed into them. She could feel the forerunning ache of a dull and terrible hurt. "If you don't let go, you just press real hard, and out pop his eyes, and he's blind as a bat for the rest of his life. Oh, he let go all right, all right." He released her and lay back laughing. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Those ain't boxing tricks, but they're all in the game of a roughhouse." "I feel like revenge," she said, trying to apply the come along to his arm. When she exerted the pressure, she cried out with pain, for she had succeeded only in hurting herself. Billy grinned at her futility. She dug her thumbs into his neck in imitation of the Japanese death touch, then gazed ruefully at the bent ends of her nails. She punched him smartly on the point of the chin, and again cried out, this time to the bruise of her knuckles. "Well, this can't hurt me," she gritted through her teeth, as she assailed his solar plexus with her doubled fists. By this time he was in a roar of laughter. Under the sheaths of muscles that were his armor, the fatal nerve center remained impervious. "Go on, do it some more," he urged when she had given up, breathing heavily. "It feels fine, like you was ticklin' me with a feather." "All right, Mr. Man," she threatened balefully. You can talk about your grips and death touches and all the rest, but that's all man's game. I know something that will beat them all, that will make a strong man as helpless as a baby. Wait a minute till I get it. There, shut your eyes, ready, I won't be a second. He waited with closed eyes, and then, softly as rose petals fluttering down, he felt her lips on his mouth. You win, he said in solemn ecstasy, and passed his arms around her. Chapter 14. In the morning, Billy went downtown to pay for Hazel and Hattie. It was due to Saxon's impatient desire to see them that he seemed to take a remarkably long time about so simple a transaction, but she forgave him when he arrived with the 2 horses hitched to the camping wagon. Had to borrow the harness, he said. Pass 'em up and climb in, and I'll show you the double H outfit, which is some outfit, I'm tellin' you. Saxon's delight was unbounded and almost speechless as they drove out into the country behind the dappled chestnuts with the cream-colored tails and manes. The seat was upholstered, high-backed and comfortable, and Billy raved about the wonders of the efficient brake. He trotted the team along the hard county road to show the standard going in them, and put them up a steep earth road, almost hub-deep with mud, to prove that the light Belgian sire was not wanting in their makeup. When Saxon at last lapsed into complete silence, he studied her anxiously with quick sidelong glances. She sighed and asked, "When do you think we'll be able to start?" "Maybe in 2 weeks, or maybe in 2 or 3 months, he sighed with solemn deliberation. "We're like the Irishman with the trunk and nothin' to put in it. Here's the wagon, here's the horses, and nothin' to pull. I know a peach of a shotgun I can get, second-hand, $18, but look at the bills we owe. Then there's a new .22 automatic rifle I want for you, and a 30-30 I've had my eye on for deer. And you want a good jointed pole as well as me, and tackle costs like Sam Hill, and harness like I want will cost $50 cold, and the wagon ought to be painted. Then there's pasture ropes and nose bags and a harness punch and all such things, and Hazel and Hattie eatin' their heads off all the time we're waitin', and I'm just itchin' to be started myself." He stopped abruptly and confusedly. "Now, Billy, what have you got up your sleeve? I can see it in your eyes," Saxon demanded and indicted in mixed metaphors. "Well, Saxon, you see it's like this. Sando ain't satisfied, he's madder'n a hatter, never got one punch at me, never had a chance to make a show in, and he wants a return match. He's blattin' around town that he can lick me with one hand tied behind him and all that kind of hot air. Which ain't the point. The point is the fight fans is wild to see a return match. They didn't get a run for their money last time, they'll fill the house. The managers has seen me already. That was why I was so long. They's 300 more waitin' on the tree for me to pick 2 weeks from last night if you'll say the word. It's just the same as I told you before. He's my meat. He still thinks I'm a rube and that it was a fluke punch. But Billy, you told me long ago that fighting took the silk out of you. That was why you'd quit it and stayed by teaming." "Not this kind of fightin'," he answered. "I got this one all doped out. I'll let 'em last till about the 7th. Not that it'll be necessary, but just to give the audience a run for its money. Of course I'll get a lump or 2 and lose some skin, then I'll time M to that glass jaw of his and drop M for the count. And we'll be all packed up and next mornin' we'll pull out. What d'ye say? Or come on." Saturday night, 2 weeks later, Saxon ran to the door when the gate clicked. Billy looked tired. His hair was wet, his nose swollen, one cheek was puffed, there was skin missing from his ears and both eyes were slightly bloodshot. "I'm darned if that boy didn't fool me," he said, as he placed the roll of gold pieces in her hand and sat down with her on his knees. "He's some boy when he gets extended. Instead of stoppin' Matt the 7th, he kept me hustlin' till the 14th. Then I got him the way I said. It's too bad he's got a glass jaw. He's quicker'n I thought, and he's got a wallop that made me mighty respectful from the 2nd round, and the prettiest little chop and come again I ever saw. But that glass jaw, he kept it in cotton wool till the 14th and then I connected. And say, I'm mighty glad it did last 14 rounds, I still got all my silk. I could see that easy, I wasn't breathin' much and every round was fast. And my legs was like iron, I could fought 40 rounds. You see, I never said nothin', but I've been suspicious all the time after that beatin' the Chicago Terror gave me." "Nonsense, you would have known it long before now," Saxon cried. "Look at all your boxing and wrestling and running at Carmel." "Nope," Billy shook his head with the conviction of utter knowledge. "That's different, it don't take it, I'll tell you. You gotta be up against the real thing, fightin' for life, round after round, with a husky you know ain't lost a thread of his silk yet. Then if you don't blow up, if your legs is steady, and your heart ain't burstin', and you ain't wobbly at all, and no signs of queer street in your head, why then you know you still got all your silk. And I got it, I got all mine, d'ye hear me? and I ain't goin' to risk it on no more fights, that's straight. Easy money's hardest in the end. From now on it's horsebain on commish, and you and me on the road till we find that Valley of the Moon. Next morning early they drove out of Ukiah. Possum sat on the seat between them, his rosy mouth agape with excitement. They had originally planned to cross over to the coast from Ukiah, but it was too early in the season for the soft earth roads to be in shape after the winter rains, so they turned east for Lake County, their route to extend north through the upper Sacramento Valley and across the mountains into Oregon. Then they would circle west to the coast, where the roads by that time would be in condition, and come down its length to the Golden Gate. All the land was green and flower-sprinkled, and each tiny valley as they entered the hills was a garden. "Huh," Billy remarked scornfully to the general landscape. "They say a rollin' stone gathers no moss, just the same this looks like some outfit we've gathered. Never had so much actual property in my life at one time, and them was the days when I wasn't rollin'. Hell, even the furniture wasn't earn, only the clothes we stood up in and some old socks and things." Saxon reached out and touched his hand, and he knew that it was a hand that loved his hand. "I've only one regret," she said. "You've earned it all yourself, I've had nothing to do with it." "Huh, you've had everything to do with it. You're like my second in a fight, you keep me happy and in condition. A man can't fight without a good second to take care of him. Hell, I wouldn't a been here if it wasn't for you. You made me pull up stakes and head out. Why, if it hadn't been for you I'd a drunk myself dead and rotten by this time, or had my neck stretched at San Quentin over hittin', some scab too hard or something or other. And look at me now, look at that roll of greenbacks," he tapped his breast, "to buy the boss some horses. Why, we're talkin' an unindin vacation and mackin' a good livin' at the same time. And one more trade I got, horse buyin' for Oakland. If I show I've got the salve and I have, all the Frisco firms'll be after me to buy for them. And it's all your fault. You're my tonic kid, all right, and if Possum wasn't lookin', well, who cares if he does look?" And Billy leaned toward her sidewise and kissed her. The way grew hard and rocky as they began to climb, but the divide was an easy one, and they soon dropped down the canyon of the Blue Lakes among lush fields of golden poppies. In the bottom of the canyon lay a wandering sheet of water of intensest blue. Ahead, the folds of hills interlaced the distance, with a remote blue mountain rising in the center of the picture. They asked questions of a handsome, black-eyed man with curly gray hair, who talked to them in a German accent, while a cheery-faced woman smiled down at them out of a trellised high window of the Swiss cottage perched on the bank. Billy watered the horses at a pretty hotel farther on, where the proprietor came out and talked, and told him he had built it himself, according to the plans of the black-eyed man with the curly gray hair, who was a San Francisco architect. Goin' up, Billy chortled, as they drove on through the winding hills past another lake of intensest blue. "D'ye notice the difference in our treatment already between ridin' and walkin' with packs on our backs, with Hazel and Hattie and Saxon and Possum, and yours truly, and this high-toned wagon? Folks most likely take us for millionaires out on a lark." The way widened. Broad, oak-studded pastures with grazing livestock lay on either hand. Then Clear Lake opened before them like an inland sea, flecked with little squalls and flaws of wind from the high mountains on the northern slopes of which still glistened white snow patches. "I've heard Mrs. Hazard rave about Lake Geneva," Saxon recalled, "but I wonder if it is more beautiful than this." "That architect fellow called this the California Alps, you remember," Billy confirmed. "And if I don't mistake, that's Lakeport showin' up ahead, an all-wild country and no railroads." "And no moon valleys here," Saxon criticized, "but it is beautiful, oh so beautiful." "Hotter'n hell in the dead of summer, I'll bet," was Billy's opinion. "Nope, the country we're lookin' for lies nearer the coast. Just the same it is beautiful, like a picture on the wall. What d'ye say we stop off and go for a swim this afternoon?" 10 days later they drove into Williams in Colusa County, and for the first time again encountered a railroad. Billy was looking for it, for the reason that at the rear of the wagon walked 2 magnificent workhorses which he had picked up for shipment to Oakland. "Too hot," was Saxon's verdict as she gazed across the shimmering level of the vast Sacramento Valley. No redwoods, no hills, no forests, no manzanita, no madronos, lonely and sad. "And like the river islands," Billy interpolated. "Richer en hell but looks too much like hard work. It'll do for those that's stuck on hard work, God knows. They's nothin' here to induce a fellow to knock off ever for a bit of play. No fishin', no huntin', nothin' but work. I'd work myself if I had to live here." North they drove, through days of heat and dust, across the California plains, and everywhere was manifest the new farming, great irrigation ditches, dug and being dug, the land threaded by power lines from the mountains, and many new farmhouses on small holdings newly fenced. The bonanza farms were being broken up. However, many of the great estates remained, 5 to 10,000 acres in extent, running from the Sacramento bank to the horizon, dancing in the heat waves, and studded with great valley oaks. It takes rich soil to make trees like those, a 10-acre farmer told them. They had driven off the road 100 feet to his tiny barn in order to water Hazel and Hattie. A sturdy young orchard covered most of his 10 acres, though a goodly portion was devoted to whitewashed henhouses and wired runways, wherein hundreds of chickens were to be seen. He had just begun work on a small frame dwelling. "I took a vacation when I bought," he explained, "and planted the trees. Then I went back to work and stayed with it till the place was cleared. Now I'm here for keeps, and soon as the house is finished I'll send for the wife. She's not very well and it will do her good. We've been planning and working for years to get away from the city." He stopped in order to give a happy sigh. "And now we're free." The water in the trough was warm from the sun. "Hold on," the man said. "Don't let them drink that, I'll give it to them cool." Stepping into a small shed, he turned an electric switch, and a motor the size of a fruit box hummed into action. A 5-inch stream of sparkling water splashed into the shallow main ditch of his irrigation system and flowed away across the orchard through many laterals. "Isn't it beautiful, eh? Beautiful, beautiful," the man chanted in an ecstasy. "It's bud and fruit, it's blood and life, look at it. It makes a gold mine laughable and a saloon a nightmare. I know I used to be a barkeeper. In fact, I've been a barkeeper most of my life, that's how I paid for this place. And I've hated the business all the time. I was a farm boy and all my life I've been wanting to get back to it. And here I am at last." He wiped his glasses the better to behold his beloved water, then seized a hoe and strode down the main ditch to open more laterals. "He's the funniest barkeeper I ever seen," Billy commented. "I took him for a businessman of some sort, must have been in some kind of a quiet hotel." "Don't drive on right away," Saxon requested. "I want to talk with him." He came back, polishing his glasses, his face beaming, watching the water as if fascinated by it. It required no more exertion on Saxon's part to start him than had been required on his part to start the motor. "The pioneers settled all this in the early 50s, he said. "The Mexicans never got this far, so it was government land. Everybody got 160 acres, and such acres. The stories they tell about how much wheat they got to the acre are almost unbelievable. Then several things happened. The sharpest and steadiest of the pioneers held what they had and added to it from the other fellows. It takes a great many quarter sections to make a bonanza farm. It wasn't long before it was most all bonanza farms." "They were the successful gamblers," Saxon put in, remembering Mark Hall's words. The man nodded appreciatively and continued. "The old folks schemed and gathered and added the land into the big holdings, and built the great barns and mansions, and planted the house orchards and flower gardens. The young folks were spoiled by so much wealth and went away to the cities to spend it, and old folks and young united in one thing, in impoverishing the soil. Year after year they scratched it and took out bonanza crops. They put nothing back, all they left was plow soil and exhausted land. Why, there's big sections they exhausted and left almost desert. The bonanza farmers are all gone now, thank the Lord, and here's where we small farmers come into our own. It won't be many years before the whole valley will be farmed in patches like mine. Look at what we're doing. Worked out land that had ceased to grow wheat, and we turn the water on, treat the soil decently, and see our orchards. We've got the water from the mountains and from under the ground. I was reading an account the other day. All life depends on food. All food depends on water. It takes 1,000 pounds of water to produce 1 pound of food, 10,000 pounds to produce 1 pound of meat. How much water do you drink in a year? About a ton. But you eat about 200 pounds of vegetables and 200 pounds of meat a year, which means you consume 100 tons of water in the vegetables and 1,000 tons in the meat, which means that it takes 1,101 tons of water each year to keep a small woman like you going. Gee, was all Billy could say. You see how population depends upon water, the ex-barkeeper went on. Well, we've got the water, immense subterranean supplies, and in not many years this valley will be populated as thick as Belgium. Fascinated by the 5-inch stream, sluiced out of the earth and back to the earth by the droning motor, he forgot his discourse and stood and gazed, rapt and unheeding, while his visitors drove on. "And him a drink slinger," Billy marveled. "He can sure sling the temperance dope if anybody should ask you." "It's lovely to think about, all that water, and all the happy people that will come here to live." "But it ain't the Valley of the Moon," Billy laughed. "No," she responded. "They don't have to irrigate in the Valley of the Moon, unless for alfalfa and such crops. What we want is the water bubbling naturally from the ground, and crossing the farm in little brooks, and on the boundary a fine big creek. With trout in it," Billy took her up. "And willows and trees of all kinds growing along the edges, and here a riffle where you can flip out trout, and there a deep pool where you can swim and high dive. And kingfishers, and rabbits calmin' down to drink, and maybe a deer. And meadowlarks in the pasture," Saxon added. "And mourning doves in the trees. We must have mourning doves and the big grey tree squirrels." "Gee, that Valley of the Moon's goin' to be some valley," Billy meditated, flicking a fly away with his whip from Hattie's side. "Think we'll ever find it?" Saxon nodded her head with great certitude. "Just as the Jews found the Promised Land, and the Mormons Utah, and the pioneers California. You remember the last advice we got when we left Oakland? Tease them that looks that finds." Chapter 15. Ever north through a fat and flourishing rejuvenated land, stopping at the towns of Willows, Red Bluff and Redding, crossing the counties of Colusa, Glen, Tehama and Shasta, went the spruce wagon drawn by the dappled chestnuts with cream-colored manes and tails. Billy picked up only 3 horses for shipment, although he visited many farms, and Saxon talked with the women while he looked over the stock with the men. And Saxon grew the more convinced that the valley she sought lay not there. At Redding they crossed the Sacramento on a cable ferry, and made a day's scorching traverse through rolling foothills and flat tablelands. The heat grew more insupportable, and the trees and shrubs were blasted and dead. Then they came again to the Sacramento, where the great smelters of Kennett explained the destruction of the vegetation. They climbed out of the smelting town, where eerie houses perched insecurely on a precipitous landscape. It was a broad, well-engineered road that took them up a grade miles long and plunged down into the canyon of the Sacramento. The road, rock-surfaced and easy-graded, hewn out of the canyon wall, grew so narrow that Billy worried for fear of meeting opposite-bound teams. Far below, the river frothed and flowed over pebbly shallows, or broke tumultuously over boulders and cascades, in its race for the great valley they had left behind. Sometimes, on the wider stretches of road, Saxon drove and Billy walked to lighten the load. She insisted on taking her turns at walking, and when he breathed the panting mares on the steep, and Saxon stood by their heads caressing them and cheering them, Billy's joy was too deep for any turn of speech as he gazed at his beautiful horses and his glowing girl, trim and colorful in her golden brown corduroy, the brown corduroy calves swelling sweetly under the abbreviated slim skirt. And when her answering look of happiness came to him, a sudden dimness in her straight grey eyes, he was overmastered by the knowledge that he must say something or burst. "Oh, you kid," he cried. And with radiant face she answered, "Oh, you kid." They camped one night in a deep dent in the canyon where was snuggled a box factory village, and where a toothless ancient, gazing with faded eyes at their traveling outfit, asked, "Be you showin'?" They passed Castle Crags, mighty bastioned and glowing red against the palpitating blue sky. They caught their first glimpse of Mt. Shasta, a rose-tinted snow peak rising, a sunset dream between and beyond green interlacing walls of canyon, a landmark destined to be with them for many days. At unexpected turns, after mounting some steep grade, Shasta would appear again, still distant, now showing 2 peaks and glacial fields of shimmering white. Miles and days they climbed, with Shasta ever developing new forms and phases in her summer snows. "A moving picture in the sky," said Billy at last. "Oh, it is all so beautiful," sighed Saxon, "but there are no moon valleys here." They encountered a plague of butterflies, and for days drove through untold millions of the fluttering beauties that covered the road with uniform velvet brown, and ever the road seemed to rise under the noses of the snorting mares, filling the air with noiseless flight, drifting down the breeze in clouds of brown and yellow, soft-flaked as snow, and piling in mounds against the fences, ever driven to float helplessly on the irrigation ditches along the roadside. Hazel and Hattie soon grew used to them, though Possum never ceased being made frantic. Who ever heard of butterfly-broke horses?" Billy chaffed. "That's worth $50 more on their price." "Wait till you get across the Oregon line into the Rogue River Valley," they were told. "There's God's paradise, climate, scenery and fruit farming, fruit ranches that yield 200%, on a valuation of $500 an acre." "Gee," Billy said when he had driven on out of hearing, "that's too rich for our digestion." And Saxon said, "I don't know about apples in the Valley of the Moon, but I do know that the yield is 10,000% of happiness on a valuation of 1 Billy, 1 Saxon, a hazel, a hattie and a possum. Through Siskiyou County and across high mountains, they came to Ashland and Medford and camped beside the wild Rogue River. "This is wonderful and glorious," pronounced Saxon, "but it is not the Valley of the Moon." "Nope, it ain't the Valley of the Moon," agreed Billy, and he said it on the evening of the day he hooked a monster steelhead, standing to his neck in the ice-cold water of the Rogue, and fighting for 40 minutes with screaming reel, ere he drew his finny prize to the bank, and with the scalp yell of a Comanche jumped and clutched it by the gills. "Them that looks finds," predicted Saxon, as they drew north out of Grant's Pass and held north across the mountains and fruitful Oregon valleys. One day, in camp by the Umpqua River, Billy bent over to begin skinning the first deer he had ever shot. He raised his eyes to Saxon and remarked, "If I didn't know California, I guess Oregon'd suit me from the ground up." In the evening, replete with deer meat, resting on his elbow and smoking his after-supper cigarette, he said, "Maybe they ain't no Valley of the Moon, and if they ain't, what of it? We could keep on this way forever, I don't ask nothing better." "There is a Valley of the Moon," Saxon answered soberly, "and we are going to find it, we've got to. Why, Billy, it would never do never to settle down. There would be no little hazels and little hatties nor little Billies." "Nor little Saxons," Billy interjected. "Nor little possums." She hurried on, nodding her head and reaching out a caressing hand to where the fox terrier was ecstatically gnawing a deer rib. A vicious snarl and a wicked snap that barely missed her fingers were her reward. "Possum," she cried in sharp reproof, again extending her hand. "Don't," Billy warned. "He can't help it and he's likely to get you next time." Even more compelling was the menacing threat that Possum growled, his jaws close guarding the bone, eyes blazing insanely, the hair rising stiffly on his neck. "It's a good dog that sticks up for its bone," Billy championed. "I wouldn't care to own one that didn't." "But it's my Possum," Saxon protested, "and he loves me. Besides, he must love me more than an old bone, and he must mind me. Here, you Possum, give me that bone, sir." Her hand went out gingerly, and the growl rose in volume and key till it culminated in a snap. "I tell you it's instinct," Billy repeated. "He does love you, but he just can't help doing it." "He's got a right to defend his bones from strangers, but not from his mother," Saxon argued. "I shall make him give up that bone to me." "Fox terriers is awful high-strung, Saxon. You likely get him hysterical." But she was obstinately set in her purpose. She picked up a short stick of firewood. "Now, sir, give me that bone." She threatened with the stick, and the dog's growling became ferocious. Again he snapped, then crouched back over his bone. Saxon raised the stick as if to strike him, and he suddenly abandoned the bone, rolled over on his back at her feet, 4 legs in the air, his ears lying meekly back, his eyes swimming and eloquent with submission and appeal. "My God," Billy breathed in solemn awe. "Look at it, presenting his solar plexus to you, his vitals and his life, all defense down, as much as sayin', 'Here I am, stamp on me, kick the life outta me. I love you, I am your slave, but I just can't help defendin' my bone. My instinct's stronger'n me, kill me, but I can't help it.'" Saxon was melted. Tears were in her eyes as she stooped and gathered the might of an animal in her arms. Possum was in a frenzy of agitation, whining, trembling, writhing, twisting, licking her face, all for forgiveness. "Heart of gold with a rose in his mouth," Saxon crooned, burying her face in the soft and quivering bundle of sensibilities. "Mother is sorry, she'll never bother you again that way. There, little love, see, there's your bone, take it." She put him down, but he hesitated between her and the bone, patently looking to her for surety of permission, yet continuing to tremble in the terrible struggle between duty and desire that seemed tearing him asunder. Not until she repeated that it was all right and nodded her head consentingly did he go to the bone. And once, a minute later, he raised his head with a sudden startle and gazed inquiringly at her. She nodded and smiled, and Possum, with a happy sigh of satisfaction, dropped his head down to the precious deer rib. "That Mercedes was right when she said men fought over jobs like dogs over bones," Billy enunciated slowly. "It's instinct. Why, I couldn't no more help reaching my fist to the point of a scab's jaw than could Possum from snappin' at you. They's no explainin' it. What a man has to, he has to. The fact that he does a thing shows he had to do it whether he can explain it or not. You remember Hall couldn't explain why he stuck that stick between Timothy McManus's legs in the foot race. What a man has to, he has to. That's all I know about it. I never had no earthly reason to beat up that lodger we had, Jimmy Harmon. He was a good guy, square and all right. But I just had to with the strike goin' to smash, and everything so bitter inside me that I could taste it. I never told you, but I saw 'em once after I got out, when my arms was mendin'. I went down to the roundhouse and waited for 'em to come in off a run, and apologized to 'em. Now why did I apologize? I don't know, except for the same reason I punched 'em, I just had to. And so Billy expounded the why of like in terms of realism, in the camp by the Umpqua River, while Possum expounded it, in similar terms of fang and appetite, on the rib of deer. Chapter 16. With Possum on the seat beside her, Saxon drove into the town of Roseburg. She drove at a walk. At the back of the wagon were tied 2 heavy young workhorses. Behind, 6 more marched free, and the rear was brought up by Billy, astride a 9th horse. All these he shipped from Roseburg to the West Oakland stables. It was in the Umpqua Valley that they heard the parable of the white sparrow. The farmer who told it was elderly and flourishing. His farm was a model of orderliness and system. Afterwards, Billy heard neighbors estimate his wealth at $250,000. "You've heard the story of the farmer and the white sparrow?" he asked Billy at dinner. "Never heard of a white sparrow even," Billy answered. "I must say they're pretty rare," the farmer owned. "But here's the story. Once there was a farmer who wasn't making much of a success. Things just didn't seem to go right, till at last one day, he heard about the wonderful white sparrow. It seems that the white sparrow comes out only just at daybreak with the first light of dawn, and that it brings all kinds of good luck to the farmer that is fortunate enough to catch it. Next morning our farmer was up at daybreak and before looking for it. And do you know he sought for it continually, for months, and never caught even a glimpse of it?" Their host shook his head. "No, he never found it, but he found so many things about the farm needing attention, and which he attended to before breakfast, that before he knew it the farm was prospering, and it wasn't long before the mortgage was paid off and he was starting a bank account." That afternoon, as they drove along, Billy was plunged in a deep reverie. "Oh, I got the point all right," he said finally. "And yet I ain't satisfied. Of course they wasn't a white sparrow, but by getting up early and attendin' to things he'd been slack about before, oh, I got it all right. And yet, Saxon, if that's what a farmer's life means, I don't want to find no Moon Valley. Life ain't hard work. Daylight to dark, hard at it, might just as well be in the city. What's the difference? The time you've got to yourself is for sleepin', and when you're sleepin' you're not enjoyin' yourself. And what's it matter where you sleep, you're deado. Might as well be dead and done with it as work your head off that way. I'd sooner stick to the road and shoot a deer and catch a trout once in a while, and lie on my back in the shade, and laugh with you and have fun with you, and go swimmin'. And I'm a willin' worker too. But they's all the difference in the world between a decent amount of work and workin' your head off." Saxon was in full accord. She looked back on her years of toil and contrasted them with the joyous life she had lived on the road. "We don't want to be rich," she said. "Let them hunt their white sparrows in the Sacramento Islands and the irrigation valleys. When we get up early in the Valley of the Moon, it will be to hear the birds sing and sing with them. And if we work hard at times, it will be only so that we'll have more time to play. And when you go swimming, I'm going with you, and we'll play so hard that we'll be glad to work for relaxation." "I'm gettin' plumb dried out," Billy announced, mopping the sweat from his sunburned forehead. "What d'ye say we head for the coast?" West they turned, dropping down wild mountain gorges from the height of land of the interior valleys. So fearful was the road, that on one stretch of 7 miles, they passed 10 broken-down automobiles. Billy would not force the mares and promptly camped beside a brawling stream from which he whipped 2 trout at a time. Here, Saxon caught her first big trout. She had been accustomed to landing them up to 9 and 10 inches, and the screech of the reel when the big one was hooked caused her to cry out in startled surprise. Billy came up the riffle to her and gave counsel. Several minutes later, cheeks flushed and eyes dancing with excitement, Saxon dragged the big fellow carefully from the water's edge into the dry sand. Here it threw the hook out and flopped tremendously until she fell upon it and captured it in her hands. 16 inches, Billy said as she held it up proudly for inspection. "Hey, what are you goin' to do?" "Wash off the sand, of course," was her answer. "Better put it in the basket," he advised, then closed his mouth and grimly watched. She stooped by the side of the stream and dipped in the splendid fish. It flopped, there was a convulsive movement on her part, and it was gone. "Oh," Saxon cried in chagrin. "Them that fines should hold," quoth Billy. "I don't care," she replied. "It was a bigger one than you ever caught anyway." "Oh, I'm not denyin' you're a peach at fishin'," he drawled. "You caught me, didn't you?" "I don't know about that," she retorted. "Maybe it was like the man who was arrested for catching trout out of season. His defense was self-defense. Billy pondered but did not see. The trout attacked him, she explained. Billy grinned. 15 minutes later he said, "You sure handed me a hot one." The sky was overcast, and as they drove along the bank of the Cockwell River, the fog suddenly enveloped them. "Woof," Billy exhaled joyfully. "Ain't it great? I can feel myself mopping it up like a dry sponge. I never appreciated fog before." Saxon held out her arms to receive it, making motions as if she were bathing in the grey mist. "I never thought I'd grow tired of the sun," she said, "but we've had more than our share the last few weeks." "Ever since we hit the Sacramento Valley," Billy affirmed. "Too much sun ain't good, I've worked that out. Sunshine is like liquor. Did you ever notice how good you felt when the sun come out after a week of cloudy weather? Well, that sunshine was just like a jolt of whiskey, had the same effect, made you feel good all over. Now when you're swimming and come out and lay in the sun, how good you feel. That's because you're lapping up a sun cocktail. But suppose you lay there in the sand a couple of hours, you don't feel so good. You're so slow-moving it takes you a long time to dress. You go home dragging your legs and feeling rotten with all the life sapped out you. What's that? It's the katzenjammer. You've been soused to the ears in sunshine like so much whiskey and now you're paying for it. That's straight. That's why fog in the climate is best." "Then we've been drunk for months," Saxon said, "and now we're going to sober up." "You bet. Why, Saxon, I can do 2 days' work in one in this climate. Look at the mares, blame me if they ain't perking up already." Vainly Saxon's eye roved the pine forest in search of her beloved redwoods. They would find them down in California, they were told in the town of Bandon. "Then we're too far north," said Saxon. "We must go south to find our Valley of the Moon." And south they went, along roads that steadily grew worse, through the dairy country of Langlois and through thick pine forests to Port Orford, where Saxon picked jeweled agates on the beach while Billy caught enormous rock cod. No railroads had yet penetrated this wild region, and the way south grew wilder and wilder. At Gold Beach they encountered their old friend, the Rogue River, which they ferried across where it entered the Pacific. Still wilder became the country, still more terrible the road, still farther apart the isolated farms and clearings. And here were neither Asiatics nor Europeans. The scant population consisted of the original settlers and their descendants, more than one old man or woman Saxon talked with, who could remember the trip across the plains with the plodding oxen. West they had fared until the Pacific itself had stopped them, and here they had made their clearings, built their rude houses and settled. In them farthest west had been reached, old customs had changed little. There were no railways, no automobile as yet had ventured their perilous roads. Eastward between them and the populous interior valleys lay the wilderness of the Coast Range, a game paradise, Billy heard, though he declared that the very road he travelled was game paradise enough for him. Had he not halted the horses, turned the reins over to Saxon, and shot an 8-pronged buck from the wagon seat. South of Gold Beach, climbing a narrow road through the virgin forest, they heard from far above the jingle of bells. 100 yards farther on Billy found a place wide enough to turn out. Here he waited, while the merry bells descending the mountain rapidly came near. They heard the grind of brakes, the soft thud of horses' hoofs, once a sharp cry of the driver, and once a woman's laughter. Some driver, Billy muttered. "I take my hat off to whoever he is hittin' a pace like that on a road like this. Listen to that, he's got powerful brakes. Zooey, that was a chuck hole, some springs, Saxon, some springs." Where the road zigzagged above, they glimpsed through the trees 4 sorrel horses trotting swiftly, and the flying wheels of a small, tan-painted trap. At the bend of the road the leaders appeared again, swinging wide on the curve. The wheelers flashed into view and the light 2-seated rig. Then the whole affair straightened out and thundered down upon them across a narrow plank bridge. In the front seat were a man and woman. In the rear seat a Japanese was squeezed in among suitcases, rods, guns, saddles, and a typewriter case, while above him and all about him, fastened most intricately, sprouted a prodigious crop of deer and elk horns. "It's Mr. and Mrs. Hastings," Saxon cried. "Whoa," Hastings yelled, putting on the brake and gathering his horses in to a stop alongside. Greetings flew back and forth, in which the Japanese, whom they had last seen on the Roamer at Rio Vista, gave and received his share. "Different from the Sacramento Islands, eh?" Hastings said to Saxon. "Nothing but old American stock in these mountains, and they haven't changed any. As John Fox Jr. said, they're our contemporary ancestors, our old folks were just like them." Mr. and Mrs. Hastings, between them, told of their long drive. They were out 2 months then, and intended to continue north through Oregon and Washington to the Canadian boundary. Then we'll ship our horses and come home by train, concluded Hastings. But the way you drive, you ought to be a whole lot further along than this, Billy criticized. But we keep stopping off everywhere, Mrs. Hastings explained. We went in to the Hooper Reservation, said Mr. Hastings, and canoed down the Trinity and Klamath rivers to the ocean, and just now we've come out from 2 weeks in the real wilds of Curry County. You must go in, Hastings advised. You'll get to Mountain Ranch tonight, and you can turn in from there. No roads, though, you'll have to pack your horses, but it's full of game. I shot 5 mountain lions and 2 bear, to say nothing of deer. And there are small herds of elk, too. No, I didn't shoot any, they're protected. These horns I got from the old hunters, I'll tell you all about it. And while the men talked, Saxon and Mrs. Hastings were not idle. Found your Valley of the Moon yet? The writer's wife asked as they were saying goodbye. Saxon shook her head. You will find it if you go far enough, and be sure you go as far as Sonoma Valley and our ranch. Then, if you haven't found it yet, we'll see what we can do. 3 weeks later, with a bigger record of mountain lions and bear than Hastings, to his credit, Billy emerged from Curry County and drove across the line into California. At once Saxon found herself among the redwoods, but they were redwoods unbelievable. Billy stopped the wagon, got out and paced around one. 45 feet, he announced. That's 15 in diameter, and they're all like it, only bigger. No, there's a runt, it's only about 9 feet through, and they're hundreds of feet tall. When I die, Billy, you must bury me in a redwood grove, Saxon adjured. I ain't goin' to let you die before I do, he assured her, and then we'll leave it in our wills for us both to be buried that way. Chapter 17. South they held along the coast, hunting, fishing, swimming and horse buying. Billy shipped his purchases on the coasting steamers. Through Del Norte and Humboldt counties they went, and through Mendocino into Sonoma, counties larger than eastern states, threading the giant woods, whipping innumerable trout streams and crossing countless rich valleys. Ever Saxon sought the Valley of the Moon. Sometimes, when all seemed fair, the lack was a railroad, sometimes madrono and manzanita trees, and usually there was too much fog. We do want a sun cocktail once in a while, she told Billy. Yep, was his answer. Too much fog might make us soggy. What we're after is betwixt and between, and we'll have to get back from the coast a ways to find it. This was in the fall of the year, and they turned their backs on the Pacific at Old Fort Ross and entered the Russian River Valley, far below Ukiah, by way of Cazadero and Guerneville. At Santa Rosa, Billy was delayed with the shipping of several horses, so that it was not until afternoon that he drove south and east for Sonoma Valley. I guess we'll no more than make Sonoma Valley when it'll be time to camp, he said, measuring the sun with his eye. This is called Bennett Valley. You cross a divide from it and come out at Glen Ellen. Now this is a mighty pretty valley if anybody should ask you, and that's some nifty mountain over there. The mountain is all right, Saxon adjudged, but all the rest of the hills are too bare, and I don't see any big trees. It takes rich soil to make big trees. Oh, I ain't sayin' it's the Valley of the Moon by a long ways. All the same, Saxon, that's some mountain. Look at the timber on it, I bet they's deer there. I wonder where we'll spend this winter, Saxon remarked. D'you know, I've just been thinkin' the same thing. Let's winter at Carmel. Mark Hall's back and so is Jim Hazard. What d'you say? Saxon nodded. Only you won't be the odd job man this time. Nope, we can make trips in good weather horse buyin', Billy confirmed, his face beaming with self-satisfaction. And if that walkin' poet of the Marble House is around, I'll sure get the gloves on with him just in memory of the time he walked me off my legs. Oh, Saxon cried, look, Billy, look. Around a bend in the road came a man in a sulky, driving a heavy stallion. The animal was a bright chestnut sorrel, with cream-colored mane and tail. The tail almost swept the ground, while the mane was so thick that it crested out of the neck and flowed down, long and wavy. He scented the mares and stopped short, head flung up and armfuls of creamy mane tossing in the breeze. He bent his head until flaring nostrils brushed impatient knees, and between the fine-pointed ears could be seen a mighty and incredible curve of neck. Again he tossed his head, fretting against the bit as the driver turned widely aside for safety in passing. They could see the blue glaze like a sheen on the surface of the horse's bright, wild eyes, and Billy closed a wary thumb on his reins and himself turned widely. He held up his hand in signal, and the driver of the stallion stopped when well past, and over his shoulder talked draft horses with Billy. Among other things, Billy learned that the stallion's name was Barbarossa, that the driver was the owner, and that Santa Rosa was his headquarters. There are 2 ways to Sonoma Valley from here, the man directed. When you come to the crossroads, the turn to the left will take you to Glen Ellen by Bennett Peak. That's it there. Rising from rolling stubble fields, Bennett Peak towered hot in the sun, a row of bastion hills leaning against its base. But hills and mountains on that side showed bare and heated, though beautiful with the sunburnt tawniness of California. The turn to the right will take you to Glen Ellen too, only it's longer and steeper grades, but your mares don't look as though it'd bother them. Which is the prettiest way? Saxon asked. Oh, the right-hand road by all means, said the man. That's Sonoma Mountain there, and the road skirts it pretty well up and goes through Cooper's Grove. Billy did not start immediately after they had said goodbye, and he and Saxon, heads over shoulders, watched the roused Barbarossa plunging mutinously on toward Santa Rosa. Gee, Billy said, I'd like to be up here next spring. At the crossroads Billy hesitated and looked at Saxon. What if it is longer? She said. Look how beautiful it is, all covered with green woods, and I just know those are redwoods in the canyons. You never can tell, the Valley of the Moon might be right up there somewhere, and it would never do to miss it just in order to save half an hour. They took the turn to the right and began crossing a series of steep foothills. As they approached the mountain there were signs of a greater abundance of water. They drove beside a running stream, and though the vineyards on the hills were summer dry, the farmhouses in the hollows and on the levels were grouped about with splendid trees. Maybe it sounds funny, Saxon observed, but I'm beginning to love that mountain already. It almost seems as if I'd seen it before somehow, it's so all-around satisfying. Oh. Crossing a bridge and rounding a sharp turn, they were suddenly enveloped in a mysterious coolness and gloom. All about them arose stately trunks of redwood. The forest floor was a rosy carpet of autumn fronds. Occasional shafts of sunlight, penetrating the deep shade, warmed the somberness of the grove. Alluring paths led off among the trees and into cozy nooks made by circles of red columns growing around the dust of vanished ancestors, witnessing the titanic dimensions of those ancestors by the girth of the circles in which they stood. Out of the grove they pulled to the steep divide, which was no more than a buttress of Sonoma Mountain. The way led on through rolling uplands and across small dips and canyons, all well wooded and adrip with water. In places the road was muddy from wayside springs. The mountain's a sponge, said Billy. Here it is, the tail end of dry summer, and the ground's just leakin' everywhere. I know I've never been here before, Saxon communed aloud. But it's all so familiar, so I must have dreamed it. And there's Madronos, A-Hole Grove and Manzanita. Why, I feel just as if I was coming home. Oh, Billy, if it should turn out to be our valley. Plastered against the side of a mountain, he queried with a skeptical laugh. No, I don't mean that. I mean on the way to our valley, because the way, all ways to our valley must be beautiful, and this, I've seen it all before, dreamed it. It's great, he said sympathetically. I wouldn't trade a square mile of this kind of country for the whole Sacramento Valley, with the river islands thrown in and Middle River for good measure. If they ain't deer up there, I miss my guess. And where they's springs they's streams, and streams means trout. They passed a large and comfortable farmhouse, surrounded by wandering barns and cowsheds, went on under forest arches, and emerged beside a field with which Saxon was instantly enchanted. It flowed in a gentle concave from the road up the mountain, its farther boundary an unbroken line of timber. The field glowed like rough gold in the approaching sunset, and near the middle of it stood a solitary great redwood, with blasted tops suggesting a nesting eyrie for eagles. The timber beyond clothed the mountain in solid green to what they took to be the top. But as they drove on, Saxon, looking back upon what she called her field, saw the real summit of Sonoma towering beyond, the mountain behind her field a mere spur upon the side of the larger mass. Ahead and toward the right, across sheer ridges of the mountains, separated by deep green canyons and broadening lower down into rolling orchards and vineyards, they caught their first sight of Sonoma Valley and the wild mountains that rimmed its eastern side. To the left they gazed across a golden land of small hills and valleys. Beyond, to the north, they glimpsed another portion of the valley, and still beyond, the opposing wall of the valley, a range of mountains, the highest of which reared its red and battered ancient crater against a rosy and mellowing sky. From north to southeast, the mountain rim curved in the brightness of the sun, while Saxon and Billy were already in the shadow of evening. He looked at Saxon, noted the ravished ecstasy of her face, and stopped the horses. All the eastern sky was blushing to rose, which descended upon the mountains, touching them with wine and ruby. Sonoma Valley began to fill with a purple flood, laving the mountain bases, rising, inundating, drowning them in its purple. Saxon pointed in silence, indicating that the purple flood was the sunset shadow of Sonoma Mountain. Billy nodded, then chirruped to the mares, and the descent began through a warm and colorful twilight. On the elevated sections of the road, they felt the cool, delicious breeze from the Pacific 40 miles away, while from each little dip and hollow came warm breaths of autumn earth, spicy with sunburnt grass and fallen leaves and passing flowers. They came to the rim of a deep canyon that seemed to penetrate to the heart of Sonoma Mountain. Again, with no word spoken, merely from watching Saxon, Billy stopped the wagon. The canyon was wildly beautiful. Tall redwoods lined its entire length. On its farther rim stood 3 rugged knolls covered with dense woods of spruce and oak. From between the knolls, a feeder to the main canyon and likewise fringed with redwoods, emerged a smaller canyon. Billy pointed to a stubble field that lay at the feet of the knolls. "It's in fields like that I've seen my mares a-pasturing," he said. They dropped down into the canyon, the road following a stream that sang under maples and alders. The sunset fires, refracted from the cloud driftage of the autumn sky, bathed the canyon with crimson, in which ruddy-limbed madronos and wine-wooded manzanitas burned and smoldered. The air was aromatic with laurel. Wild grapevines bridged the stream from tree to tree. Oaks of many sorts were veiled in lacy Spanish moss. Ferns and brakes grew lush beside the stream. From somewhere came the plaint of a mourning dove. 50 feet above the ground, almost over their heads, a Douglas squirrel crossed the road, a flash of grey between 2 trees, and they marked the continuance of its aerial passage by the bending of the boughs. "I've got a hunch," said Billy. "Let me say it first," Saxon begged. He waited, his eyes on her face as she gazed about her in rapture. "We've found our valley," she whispered. "Was that it?" He nodded but checked speech at sight of a small boy driving a cow up the road, a preposterously big shotgun in one hand, in the other as preposterously big a jackrabbit. "How far to Glen Ellen?" Billy asked. "1.5 miles," was the answer. "What creek is this?" inquired Saxon. "Wild Water. It empties into Sonoma Creek half a mile down." "Trout," this from Billy. "If you know how to catch 'em," grinned the boy. "Deer up the mountain." "It ain't open season," the boy evaded. "I guess you never shot a deer," Billy slyly baited and was rewarded with. "I got the horns to show." "Deer shed their horns," Billy teased on. "Anybody can find 'em." "I got the meat on mine. It ain't dry yet." The boy broke off, gazing with shocked eyes into the pit Billy had dug for him. "It's all right, sonny," Billy laughed as he drove on. "I ain't the game warden, I'm buyin' horses." More leaping tree squirrels, more ruddy madronos and majestic oaks, more fairy circles of redwoods, and still beside the singing stream, they passed a gate by the roadside. Before it stood a rural mailbox, on which was lettered Edmund Hale. Standing under the rustic arch, leaning upon the gate, a man and woman composed a picture so arresting and beautiful that Saxon caught her breath. They were side by side, the delicate hand of the woman curled in the hand of the man, which looked as if made to confer benedictions. His face bore out this impression, a beautiful browed countenance, with large, benevolent grey eyes under a wealth of white hair that shone like spun glass. He was fair and large. The little woman beside him was daintily wrought. She was saffron brown, as a woman of the white race can well be, with smiling eyes of bluest blue. In quaint sage-green draperies, she seemed a flower, with her small vivid face irresistibly reminding Saxon of a springtime wake robin. Perhaps the picture made by Saxon and Billy was equally arresting and beautiful as they drove down through the golden end of day. The two couples had eyes only for each other. The little woman beamed joyously. The man's face glowed into the benediction that had trembled there. To Saxon, like the field up the mountain, like the mountain itself, it seemed that she had always known this adorable pair. She knew that she loved them. "How d'ye do?" said Billy. "You blessed children," said the man. "I wonder if you know how dear you look sitting there." That was all. The wagon had passed by, rustling down the road, which was carpeted with fallen leaves of maple, oak, and alder. Then they came to the meeting of the 2 creeks. "Oh, what a place for a home," Saxon cried, pointing across Wild Water. "See Billy on that bench there above the meadow." "It's a rich bottom, Saxon, and so is the bench rich. Look at the big trees on it, and they sure to be springs." "Drive over," she said. Forsaking the main road, they crossed Wild Water on a narrow bridge and continued along an ancient, rutted road that ran beside an equally ancient worm fence of split redwood rails. They came to a gate, open and off its hinges, through which the road led out on the bench. "This is it, I know it," Saxon said with conviction. "Drive in, Billy." A small, whitewashed farmhouse with broken windows showed through the trees. "Talk about your madronos." Billy pointed to the father of all madronos, 6 feet in diameter at its base, sturdy and sound, which stood before the house. They spoke in low tones as they passed around the house under great oak trees and came to a stop before a small barn. They did not wait to unharness. Tying the horses, they started to explore. The pitch from the bench to the meadow was steep yet thickly wooded with oaks and manzanita. As they crashed through the underbrush, they startled a score of quail into flight. "How about game?" Saxon queried. Billy grinned and fell to examining a spring which bubbled a clear stream into the meadow. Here the ground was sunbaked and wide open in a multitude of cracks. Disappointment leaped into Saxon's face, but Billy, crumbling a clod between his fingers, had not made up his mind. "It's rich," he pronounced, "the cream of the soil that's been washin' down from the hills for 10,000 years. But—" He broke off, stared all about, studying the configuration of the meadow, crossed it to the redwood trees beyond, then came back. "It's no good as it is," he said, "but it's the best ever if it's handled right. All it needs is a little common sense and a lot of drainage. This meadow's a natural basin not yet filled level. They's a sharp slope through the redwoods to the creek. Come on, I'll show you." They went through the redwoods and came out on Sonoma Creek. At this spot was no singing. The stream poured into a quiet pool. The willows on their side brushed the water. The opposite side was a steep bank. Billy measured the height of the bank with his eye, the depth of the water with a driftwood pole. 15 feet, he announced. "That allows all kinds of hide-in from the bank, and it's 100 yards of a swim up and down." They followed down the pool. It emptied in a riffle across exposed bedrock into another pool. As they looked, a trout flashed into the air and back, leaving a widening ripple on the quiet surface. "I guess we won't winter in Carmel," Billy said. "This place was specially manufactured for us. In the morning I'll find out who owns it." Half an hour later, feeding the horses, he called Saxon's attention to a locomotive whistle. "You've got your railroad," he said. "That's a train pulling into Glen Ellen, and it's only a mile from here." Saxon was dozing off to sleep under the blankets when Billy aroused her. "Suppose the guy that owns it won't sell?" "There isn't the slightest doubt," Saxon answered with unruffled certainty. "This is our place, I know it." Chapter 18. They were awakened by Possum, who was indignantly reproaching a tree squirrel for not coming down to be killed. The squirrel chattered garrulous remarks that drove Possum into a mad attempt to climb the tree. Billy and Saxon giggled and hugged each other at the terrier's frenzy. "If this is goin' to be our place, there'll be no shootin' of tree squirrels," Billy said. Saxon pressed his hand and sat up. From beneath the bench came the cry of a meadow lark. "There isn't anything left to be desired," she sighed happily. "Except the deed," Billy corrected. After a hasty breakfast, they started to explore, running the irregular boundaries of the place and repeatedly crossing it from rail fence to creek and back again. 7 springs they found along the foot of the bench on the edge of the meadow. "There's your water supply," Billy said. "Drain the meadow, work the soil up, and with fertilizer and all that water you can grow crops the year round. There must be 5 acres of it, and I wouldn't trade it for Mrs. Mortimer's." They were standing in the old orchard, on the bench where they had counted 27 trees, neglected but of generous girth. "And on top the bench back of the house we can grow berries." Saxon paused, considering a new thought. "If only Mrs. Mortimer would come up and advise us." "Do you think she would, Billy?" "Sure she would. It ain't more 'n 4 hours run from San Jose, but first we'll get our hooks into the place, then you can write to her." Sonoma Creek gave the long boundary to the little farm. 2 sides were worm-fenced, and the 4th side was wild water. "Why, we'll have that beautiful man and woman for neighbors," Saxon recollected. "Wild water will be the dividing line between their place and ours." "It ain't ours yet," Billy commented. "Let's go and call on 'em, they'll be able to tell us all about it." "It's just as good as," she replied. "The big thing has been the finding, and whoever owns it doesn't care much for it. It hasn't been lived in for a long time. And oh, Billy, are you satisfied?" "With every bit of it," he answered frankly, "as far as it goes. But the trouble is it don't go far enough." The disappointment in her face spurred him to renunciation of his particular dream. "We'll buy it, that's settled," he said. "But outside the meadow they's so much woods that they's little pasture, not more'n enough for a couple of horses and a cow. But I don't care, We can't have everything, and what they is almighty good. Let us call it a starter, she consoled. Later on we can add to it, maybe the land alongside that runs up the wild water to the 3 knolls we saw yesterday. Where I seen my horses pasture in, he remembered with a flash of eye. Why not? So much has come true since we hit the road, maybe that'll come true too. We'll work for it, Billy. We'll work like hell for it, he said grimly. They passed through the rustic gate and along a path that wound through wild woods. There was no sign of the house until they came abruptly upon it, bowered among the trees. It was 8-sided, and so justly proportioned that its 2 stories made no show of height. The house belonged there. It might have sprung from the soil just as the trees had. There were no formal grounds. The wild grew to the doors. The low porch of the main entrance was raised only a step from the ground. Trillium Covert, they read, in quaint carved letters under the eave of the porch. Come right upstairs, you dears, a voice called from above in response to Saxon's knock. Stepping back and looking up, she beheld the little lady smiling down from a sleeping porch. Clad in a rosy-tissued and flowing house gown, she again reminded Saxon of a flower. Just push the front door open and find your way, was the direction. Saxon led with Billy at her heels. They came into a room bright with windows where a big log smouldered in a rough stone fireplace. On the stone slab above stood a huge Mexican jar, filled with autumn branches and trailing fluffy smoke vine. The walls were finished in warm natural woods, stained but without polish. The air was aromatic with clean wood odors. A walnut organ loomed in a shallow corner of the room. All corners were shallow in this octagonal dwelling. In another corner were many rows of books. There, through the windows, across a low couch indubitably made for use, could be seen a restful picture of autumn trees and yellow grasses, threaded by well-worn paths that ran here and there over the tiny estate. A delightful little stairway wound past more windows to the upper story. Here the little lady greeted them, and led them into what Saxon knew at once was her room. The 2 octagonal sides of the house which showed in this wide room were given wholly to windows. Under the long sill to the floor were shelves of books. Books lay here and there, in the disorder of use on work table, couch and desk. On a sill by an open window, a jar of autumn leaves breathed the charm of the sweet brown wife, who seated herself in a tiny rattan chair, enamelled a cheery red, such as children delight to rock in. A queer house, Mrs. Hale laughed girlishly and contentedly. But we love it. Edmund made it with his own hands even to the plumbing, though he did have a terrible time with that before he succeeded. How about that hardwood floor downstairs, and the fireplace? Billy inquired. All, she replied proudly, and half the furniture, that cedar desk there, the table with his own hands. They are such gentle hands, Saxon was moved to say. Mrs. Hale looked at her quickly, her vivid face alive with a grateful light. They are gentle, the gentlest hands I have ever known, she said softly, and you are a dear to have noticed it, for you only saw them yesterday in passing. I couldn't help it, Saxon said simply. Her gaze slipped past Mrs. Hale, attracted by the wall beyond, which was done in a bewitching honeycomb pattern dotted with golden bees. The walls were hung with a very few, framed pictures. They are all of people, Saxon said, remembering the beautiful paintings in Mark Hall's bungalow. My windows frame my landscape paintings, Mrs. Hale answered, pointing out of doors. Inside I want only the faces of my dear ones whom I cannot have with me always. Some of them are dreadful rovers. Oh, Saxon was on her feet and looking at a photograph. You know Clara Hastings? I ought to, I did everything but nurse her at my breast. She came to me when she was a little baby. Her mother was my sister. Do you know how greatly you resemble her? I remarked it to Edmund yesterday. He had already seen it. It wasn't a bit strange that his heart leaped out to you too as you came drilling down behind those beautiful horses. So Mrs. Hale was Clara's aunt, old stock that had crossed the plains. Saxon knew now why she had reminded her so strongly of her own mother. The talk whipped quite away from Billy, who could only admire the detailed work of the cedar desk while he listened. Saxon told of meeting Clara and Jack Hastings on their yacht and on their driving trip in Oregon. They were off again, Mrs. Hale said, having shipped their horses home from Vancouver and taken the Canadian Pacific on their way to England. Mrs. Hale knew Saxon's mother, or rather her poems, and produced not only the story of the files, but a ponderous scrapbook which contained many of her mother's poems which Saxon had never seen. A sweet singer, Mrs. Hale said, but so many had sung in the days of gold and been forgotten. There had been no army of magazines then, and the poems had perished in local newspapers. Jack Hastings had fallen in love with Clara, the talk ran on. Then, visiting at Trillium Covert, he had fallen in love with Sonoma Valley and bought a magnificent home ranch, though little enough he saw of it, being away over the world so much of the time. Mrs. Hale talked of her own journey across the plains, a little girl in the late 50s, and, like Mrs. Mortimer, knew all about the fight at Little Meadow, and the tale of the massacre of the emigrant train of which Billy's father had been the sole survivor. And so, Saxon concluded an hour later, we've been 3 years searching for our Valley of the Moon, and now we've found it. Valley of the Moon, Mrs. Hale queried. Then you knew about it all the time. What kept you so long? No, we didn't know. We just started on a blind search for it. Mark Hall called it a pilgrimage and was always teasing us to carry long staffs. He said when we found the spot we'd know, because then the staffs would burst into blossom. He laughed at all the good things we wanted in our valley, and one night he took me out and showed me the moon through a telescope. He said that was the only place we could find such a wonderful valley. He meant it was moonshine, but we adopted the name and went on looking for it. What a coincidence, Mrs. Hale exclaimed, for this is the Valley of the Moon. I know it, Saxon said with quiet confidence. It has everything we wanted. But you don't understand, my dear. This is the Valley of the Moon. This is Sonoma Valley. Sonoma is an Indian word and means the Valley of the Moon. That was what the Indians called it for untold ages before the first white men came. We, who love it, still so call it. And then Saxon recalled the mysterious references Jack Hastings and his wife had made to it, and the talk tripped along until Billy grew restless. He cleared his throat significantly and interrupted. We want to find out about that ranch across the creek, who owns it, if they'll sell, where we'll find 'em, and such things. Mrs. Hale stood up. We'll go and see Edmund, she said, catching Saxon by the hand and leading the way. My, Billy ejaculated, towering above her. I used to think Saxon was small, but she'd make 2 of you. And you're pretty big, the little woman smiled, but Edmund is taller than you and broader-shouldered. They crossed a bright hall and found the big beautiful husband lying back reading in a huge mission rocker. Beside it was another tiny child's chair of red enameled rattan. Along the length of his thigh, the head on his knee and directed toward a smouldering log in a fireplace, clung an incredibly large striped cat. Like its master, it turned its head to greet the newcomers. Again Saxon felt the loving benediction that abided in his face, his eyes, his hands, toward which she involuntarily dropped her eyes. Again she was impressed by the gentleness of them. They were hands of love. They were the hands of a type of man she had never dreamed existed. No one in that merry crowd of Carmel had prefigured him. They were artists. This was the scholar, the philosopher. In place of the passion of youth and all youth's mad revolt, was the benignance of wisdom. Those gentle hands had passed all the bitter by and plucked only the sweet of life. Dearly as she loved them, she shuddered to think what some of those Carmelites would be like when they were as old as he, especially the dramatic critic and the Iron Man. Here are the dear children, Edmund, Mrs. Hale said. What do you think? They want to buy the Madrona Ranch. They've been 3 years searching for it. I forgot to tell them we had searched 10 years for Trillium Covert. Tell them all about it. Surely Mr. Naismith is still of a mind to sell. They seated themselves in simple massive chairs, and Mrs. Hale took the tiny rattan beside the big mission rocker, her slender hand curled like a tendril in Edmund's. And while Saxon listened to the talk, her eyes took in the grave rooms lined with books. She began to realize how a mere structure of wood and stone may express the spirit of him who conceives and makes it. Those gentle hands had made all this, the very furniture, she guessed as her eyes roved from desk to chair, from work table to reading stand beside the bed in the other room, where stood a green-shaded lamp and orderly piles of magazines and books. As for the matter of Madrona Ranch, it was easy enough, he was saying. Naismith would sell, had desired to sell for the past 5 years, ever since he had engaged in the enterprise of bottling mineral water at the springs lower down the valley. It was fortunate that he was the owner, for about all the rest of the surrounding land was owned by a Frenchman, an early settler. He would not part with a foot of it. He was a peasant with all the peasant's love of the soil which in him had become an obsession, a disease. He was a land miser. With no business capacity, old and opinionated, he was land poor, and it was an open question which would arrive first, his death or bankruptcy. As for Madrona Ranch, Naismith owned it and had set the price at $50 an acre. That would be $1,000, for there were 20 acres. As a farming investment using old-fashioned methods, it was not worth it. As a business investment, yes, for the virtues of the valley were on the eve of being discovered by the outside world, and no better location for a summer home could be found. As a happiness investment in joy of beauty and climate, it was worth 1,000 times the price asked. And he knew Naismith would allow time on most of the amount. Edmund's suggestion was that they take a 2-year lease with option to buy, the rent to apply to the purchase if they took it up. Naismith had done that once with a Swiss who had paid a monthly rental of $10, but the man's wife had died and he had gone away. Edmund soon divined Billy's renunciation, though not the nature of it, and several questions brought it forth: the old pioneer dream of land spaciousness, of cattle on 100 hills, 160 acres of land, the smallest thinkable division. "But you don't need all that land, dear lad," Edmund said softly. "I see you understand intensive farming. Have you thought about intensive horse raising?" Billy's jaw dropped at the smashing newness of the idea. He considered it but could see no similarity in the two processes. Unbelief leaped into his eyes. "You gotta show me," he cried. The elder man smiled gently. "Let us see. In the first place, you don't need those 20 acres except for beauty. There are 5 acres in the meadow. You don't need more than 2 of them to make your living at selling vegetables. In fact, you and your wife, working from daylight to dark, cannot properly farm those 2 acres. Remains 3 acres. You have plenty of water for it from the springs. Don't be satisfied with 1 crop a year, like the rest of the old-fashioned farmers in this valley. Farm it like your vegetable plot intensively all the year, in crops that make horse feed, irrigating, fertilizing, rotating your crops. Those 3 acres will feed as many horses as heaven knows how huge an area of unseeded, uncared for wasted pasture would feed. Think it over. I'll lend you books on the subject. I don't know how large your crops will be, nor do I know how much a horse eats. That's your business. But I am certain, with a hired man to take your place helping your wife on her 2 acres of vegetables, that by the time you own the horses your 3 acres will feed, you will have all you can attend to. Then it will be time to get more land, for more horses, for more riches, if that way happiness lie." Billy understood. In his enthusiasm he dashed out, "You're some farmer." Edmund smiled and glanced toward his wife. "Give him your opinion of that, Annette." Her blue eyes twinkled as she complied. "Why, the dear, he never farms, he has never farmed, but he knows." She waved her hand about the book-lined walls. "He is a student of good. He studies all good things done by good men under the sun. His pleasure is in books and woodworking." "Don't forget Dulcie," Edmund gently protested. "Yes, and Dulcie." Annette laughed. "Dulcie is our cow. It is a great question with Jack Hastings whether Edmund dotes more on Dulcie or Dulcie dotes more on Edmund. When he goes to San Francisco, Dulcie is miserable. So is Edmund until he hastens back. Oh, Dulcie has given me no few jealous pangs, but I have to confess he understands her as no one else does." "That is the one practical subject I know by experience," Edmund confirmed. "I am an authority on Jersey cows. Call upon me any time for counsel." He stood up and went toward his bookshelves, and they saw how magnificently large a man he was. He paused, a book in his hand, to answer a question from Saxon. No, there were no mosquitoes, although one summer when the south wind blew for 10 days, an unprecedented thing, a few mosquitoes had been carried up from San Pablo Bay. As for fog, it was the making of the valley, and where they were situated, sheltered behind Sonoma Mountain, the fogs were almost invariably high fogs. Sweeping in from the ocean 40 miles away, they were deflected by Sonoma Mountain and shunted high into the air. Another thing, Trillium Covert and Madrona Ranch were happily situated in a narrow thermal belt, so that in the frosty mornings of winter the temperature was always several degrees higher than in the rest of the valley. In fact, frost was very rare in the thermal belt, as was proved by the successful cultivation of certain orange and lemon trees. Edmund continued reading titles and selecting books until he had drawn out quite a number. He opened the top one, Bolton Hall's 3 Acres and Liberty, and read to them of a man who walked 650 miles a year in cultivating, by old-fashioned methods, 20 acres, from which he harvested 3,000 bushels of poor potatoes, and of another man, a new farmer who cultivated only 5 acres, walked 200 miles, and produced 3,000 bushels of potatoes, early and choice, which he sold at many times the price received by the first man. Saxon received the books from Edmund, and as she heaped them in Billy's arms, read the titles. They were Wixon's California Fruits, Wixon's California Vegetables, Brooks Fertilizers, Watson's Farm Poultry, King's Irrigation and Drainage, Kropotkin's Fields, Factories and Workshops, and Farmer's Bulletin No. 22 on the feeding of farm animals. "Come for more any time you want them," Edmund invited. "I have hundreds of volumes on farming and all the agricultural bulletins. And you must come and get acquainted with Dulcie your first spare time, he called after them out the door. Chapter 19. Mrs. Mortimer arrived with seed catalogues and farm books, to find Saxon immersed in the farm books borrowed from Edmund. Saxon showed her around, and she was delighted with everything, including the terms of the lease and its option to buy. And now, she said, what is to be done? Sit down, both of you. This is a council of war, and I am the one person in the world to tell you what to do. I ought to be. Anybody who has reorganized and recatalogued a great city library should be able to start you young people on in short order. Now, where shall we begin? She paused for breath of consideration. First, Madrono Ranch is a bargain. I know soil, I know beauty, I know climate. Madrono Ranch is a gold mine. There is a fortune in that meadow. Tilth, I'll tell you about that later. First, here's the land. Second, what are you going to do with it? Make a living? Yes, vegetables, of course. What are you going to do with them after you have grown them? Sell. Where? Now listen, you must do as I did. Cut out the middleman. Sell directly to the consumer. Drum up your own market. Do you know what I saw from the car windows coming up the valley, only several miles from here? Hotels, springs, summer resorts, winter resorts, population mouths market. How is that market supplied? I looked in vain for truck gardens. Billy, harness up your horses and be ready directly after dinner to take Saxon and me driving. Never mind everything else. Let things stand. What's the use of starting for a place of which you haven't the address? We'll look for the address this afternoon, then we'll know where we are, at. The last syllable a smiling concession to Billy. But Saxon did not accompany them. There was too much to be done in cleaning the long-abandoned house and in preparing an arrangement for Mrs. Mortimer to sleep. And it was long after supper time when Mrs. Mortimer and Billy returned. You lucky, lucky children, she began immediately. This valley is just waking up. Here's your market. There isn't a competitor in the valley. I thought those resorts looked New Calient, Boys Hot Springs, El Verano, and all along the line. Then there are 3 little hotels in Glen Ellen, right next door. Oh, I've talked with all the owners and managers. She's a wooz, Billy admired. She'd brace up to guard on a business proposition. You oughta seen her. Mrs. Mortimer acknowledged the compliment and dashed on. And where do all the vegetables come from? Wagons drive down 12 to 15 miles from Santa Rosa and up from Sonoma. Those are the nearest truck farms, and when they fail, as they often do, I am told, to supply the increasing needs, the managers have to express vegetables all the way from San Francisco. I've introduced Billy. They've agreed to patronize home industry. Besides, it is better for them. You'll deliver just as good vegetables just as cheap. You will make it a point to deliver better, fresher vegetables, and don't forget that delivery for you will be cheaper by virtue of the shorter haul. No day-old egg stunt here. No jams nor jellies, but you've got lots of space up on the bench here on which you can't grow vegetables. Tomorrow morning I'll help you lay out the chicken runs and houses. Besides, there is the matter of capons for the San Francisco market. You'll start small. It will be a sideline at first. I'll tell you all about that too and send you the literature. You must use your head, let others do the work. You must understand that thoroughly. The wages of superintendents are always larger than the wages of the laborers. You must keep books. You must know where you stand. You must know what pays and what doesn't and what pays best. Your books will tell that. I'll show you all in good time. And think of it, all that on 2 acres, Billy murmured. Mrs. Mortimer looked at him sharply. 2 acres, your granny, she said with asperity. 5 acres, and then you won't be able to supply your market. And you, my boy, as soon as the first rains come, will have your hands full and your horses weary draining that meadow. We'll work those plans out tomorrow also. There is the matter of berries on the bench here, and trellis table grapes the choicest. They bring the fancy prices. There will be blackberries, Burbanks, he lives at Santa Rosa, Loganberries, Mammoth berries, but don't fool with strawberries. That's a whole occupation in itself. They're not vines, you know. I've examined the orchard. It's a good foundation. We'll settle the pruning and grafts later. But Billy wanted 3 acres of the meadow. Saxon explained at the first chance. What for? To grow hay and other kinds of food for the horses he's going to raise. Buy it out of a portion of the profits from those 3 acres. Mrs. Mortimer decided on the instant. Billy swallowed and again achieved renunciation. All right, he said with a brave show of cheerfulness. Let her go, us for the greens. During the several days of Mrs. Mortimer's visit, Billy let the 2 women settle things for themselves. Oakland had entered upon a boom, and from the West Oakland stables had come an urgent letter for more horses, so Billy was out early and late, scouring the surrounding country for young work animals. In this way, at the start, he learned his valley thoroughly. There was also a clearing out at the West Oakland stables of mares whose feet had been knocked out on the hard city pavements, and he was offered first choice at bargain prices. They were good animals. He knew what they were because he knew them of old time. The soft earth of the country, with a preliminary rest in pasture with their shoes pulled off, would put them in shape. They would never do again on hard-paved streets, but there were years of farm work in them. And then there was the breeding, but he could not undertake to buy them. He fought out the battle in secret and said nothing to Saxon. At night he would sit in the kitchen and smoke, listening to all that the two women had done and planned in the day. The right kind of horses was hard to buy, and as he put it, it was like pulling a tooth to get a farmer to part with one, despite the fact that he had been authorized to increase the buying sum by as much as $50. Despite the coming of the automobile, the price of heavy draft animals continued to rise. From as early as Billy could remember, the price of the big work horses had increased steadily. After the great earthquake, the price had jumped, yet it had never gone back. "Billy, you make more money as a horse buyer than a common laborer, don't you?" Mrs. Mortimer asked. "Very well then, you won't have to drain the meadow or plough it or anything. You keep right on buying horses, work with your head, but out of what you make you will please pay the wages of one labourer for Saxon's vegetables. It will be a good investment with quick returns." "Sure," he agreed. "That's all anybody hires anybody for, to make money out but how Saxon and one man are goin' to work them 5 acres, when Mr. Hale says 2 of us couldn't do what's needed on 2 acres, is beyond me." "Saxon isn't going to work," Mrs. Mortimer retorted. "Did you see me working at San Jose? Saxon is going to use her head. It's about time you woke up to that. $1.50 a day is what is earned by persons who don't use their heads, and she isn't going to be satisfied with $1.50 a day. Now listen, I had a long talk with Mr. Hale this afternoon. He says there are practically no efficient labourers to be hired in the valley." "I know that," Billy interjected. "All the good men go to the cities. It's only the leave-ins that's left. The good ones that stay behind ain't workin' for wages." "Which is perfectly true, every word. Now listen, children, I knew about it and I spoke to Mr. Hale. He is prepared to make the arrangements for you. He knows all about it himself and is in touch with the warden. In short, you will parole 2 good conduct prisoners from San Quentin, and they will be gardeners. There are plenty of Chinese and Italians there, and they are the best truck farmers. You kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You serve the poor convicts and you serve yourselves." Saxon hesitated, shocked, while Billy gravely considered the question. "You know John," Mrs. Mortimer went on, "Mr. Hale's man about the place. How do you like him?" "Oh, I was wishing only today that we could find somebody like him," Saxon said eagerly. "He's such a dear, faithful soul. Mrs. Hale told me a lot of fine things about him." "There's one thing she didn't tell you," smiled Mrs. Mortimer. "John is a paroled convict. 28 years ago, in hot blood, he killed a man in a quarrel over 65 cents. He's been out of prison with the Hales 3 years now. You remember Louis, the old Frenchman on my place? He's another, so that's settled. When your 2 come, of course you will pay them fair wages, and we'll make sure they're the same nationality, either Chinese or Italians. Well, when they come, John, with their help, and under Mr. Hale's guidance, will knock together a small cabin for them to live in. We'll select the spot. Even so, when your farm is in full swing, you'll have to have more outside help. So keep your eyes open, Billy, while you're gallivanting over the valley." The next night Billy failed to return, and at 9 o'clock a Glen Ellen boy on horseback delivered a telegram. Billy had sent it from Lake County. He was after horses for Oakland. Not until the 3rd night did he arrive home, tired to exhaustion, but with an ill-concealed air of pride. "Now what have you been doing these 3 days?" Mrs. Mortimer demanded. "Usin' my head," he boasted quietly. "Killin' 2 birds with 1 stone, and, take it from me, I killed a whole flock. I got word of it at Lawndale, and I want to tell you Hazel and Hattie was some tired when I stabled McCalistoga and pulled out on the stage over St. Helena. I was Johnny on the spot, and I nailed 8 whoppers, the whole outfit of a mountain teamster. Young animals, sound as $1, and the lightest of 'em over 1,500. I shipped 'em last night from Calistoga. And, well, that ain't all. Before that first day at Lawndale, I seen the fellow with the team in contract for the Pavinstone quarry. Sell horses. He wanted to buy 'em. He wanted to buy 'em bad. He'd even rent 'em, he said." "And you sent him the 8 you bought," Saxon broke in. "Guess again. I bought them 8 with Oakland money and they was shipped to Oakland. But I got the Lawndale contractor on long distance and he agreed to pay me $50 a day rent for every work horse up to 6 dozen. Then I telegraphed the boss tellin' him to ship me 6 sore-footed mares, Bud Struthers to make the choice and to charge to my commission. Bud knows what I'm after. Soon as they come, off go their shoes. 2 weeks in pasture and then they go to Lawndale. They can do the work. It's a downhill haul to the railroad on a dirt road. $50 rent each, that's $3 a day. They'll bring me 6 days a week. I don't feed 'em shoom or nothin', and I keep an eye on 'em to see they're treated right. $3 a day, eh? Well, I guess that'll keep a couple of $, and half men goin' for Saxon unless she works 'em Sundays. The Valley of the Moon, why we'll be wearing diamonds before long. Gosh, a fellow could live in the city 1,000 years and not get such chances. It beats China lottery. He stood up. I'm goin' out to water Hazel and Hattie, feed 'em and bed 'em down. I'll eat soon as I come back. The 2 women were regarding each other with shining eyes, each on the verge of speech when Billy returned to the door and stuck his head in. They's one thing maybe you ain't got, he said. I pull down them $3 every day, but the 6 mares is mine too. I own they're mine. Are you on? Chapter 20. I'm not done with you children, had been Mrs. Mortimer's parting words, and several times that winter she ran up to advise and to teach Saxon how to calculate her crops for the small immediate market, for the increasing spring market, and for the height of summer, at which time she would be able to sell all she could possibly grow and then not supply the demand. In the meantime, Hazel and Hattie were used every odd moment in hauling manure from Glen Ellen, whose barnyards had never known such a thorough cleaning. Also, there were loads of commercial fertilizer from the railroad station, bought under Mrs. Mortimer's instructions. The convicts paroled were Chinese. Both had served long in prison and were old men, but the day's work they were habitually capable of won Mrs. Mortimer's approval. Gao Yum, 20 years before, had had charge of the vegetable garden of one of the great Menlo Park estates. His disaster had come in the form of a fight over a game of fan tan in the Chinese quarter at Redwood City. His companion, Chan Kai, had been a hatchet man of note in the old fighting days of the San Francisco Tongs, but a quarter-century of discipline in the prison vegetable gardens had cooled his blood and turned his hand from hatchet to hoe. These 2 assistants had arrived in Glen Ellen like precious goods in bond and been receipted for by the local deputy sheriff, who, in addition, reported on them to the prison authorities each month. Saxon, too, made out a monthly report and sent it in. As for the danger of their cutting her throat, she quickly got over the idea of it. The mailed hand of the state hovered over them. The taking of a single drink of liquor would provoke that hand to close down and jerk them back to prison cells. Nor had they freedom of movement. When old Gao Yum needed to go to San Francisco to sign certain papers before the Chinese consul, permission had first to be obtained from San Quentin. Then, too, neither man was nasty-tempered. Saxon had been apprehensive of the task of bossing 2 desperate convicts, but when they came she found it a pleasure to work with them. She could tell them what to do, but it was they who knew how to do. From them she learned all the 10,000 tricks and quirks of artful gardening, and she was not long in realizing how helpless she would have been had she depended on local labor. Still further, she had no fear because she was not alone. She had been using her head. It was quickly apparent to her that she could not adequately oversee the outside work and at the same time do the housework. She wrote to Ukiah, to the energetic widow who had lived in the adjoining house and taken in washing. She had promptly closed with Saxon's offer. Mrs. Paul was 40, short in stature and weighed 200 pounds but never wearied on her feet. Also, she was devoid of fear, and according to Billy could settle the hash of both Chinese with one of her mighty arms. Mrs. Paul arrived with her son, a country lad of 16 who knew horses and could milk Hilda, the pretty Jersey which had successfully passed Edmund's expert eye. Though Mrs. Paul ably handled the house, there was one thing Saxon insisted on doing, namely, washing her own pretty flimsies. When I'm no longer able to do that, she told Billy, you can take a spade to that clump of redwoods beside Wild Water and dig a hole. It will be time to bury me. It was early in the days of Madrona Ranch, at the time of Mrs. Mortimer's second visit, that Billy drove in with a load of pipe. And house, chicken yards and barn were piped from the second-hand tank he installed below the house spring. I guess I can use my head, he said. I watched a woman over on the other side of the valley pack in water 200 feet from the spring to the house, and I did some figuring. I put it at 3 trips a day and on wash days a whole lot more, and you can't guess what I made out she traveled a year packin' water. 122 miles. To get that, 122 miles, I asked her how long she'd been there. 31 years, multiply it for yourself. 3,782 miles, all for the sake of 200 feet of pipe. Wouldn't that jar you? Oh, I ain't done yet. They's a bathtub and stationary tubs comin' soon as I can see my way. And say, Saxon, you know that little clear flat just where wild water runs into Sonoma? They's all of an acre of it. And it's mine, got that, and no walkin' on the grass for you. It'll be my grass. I'm goin' upstream a ways and put in a ram. I got a big second-hand one staked out that I can get for $10, and it'll pump more water'n I need. And you'll see alfalfa growin' that'll make your mouth water. I gotta have another horse to travel around on. You're usin' Hazel and Hattie too much to give me a chance, and I'll never see 'em as soon as you start deliverin' vegetables. I guess that alfalfa'll help some to keep another horse goin'. But Billy was destined for a time to forget his alfalfa in the excitement of bigger ventures. First came trouble. The several $100s he had arrived with in Sonoma Valley, and all his own commissions since earned, had gone into improvements and living. The $18 a week rental for his 6 horses at Lawndale went to pay wages, and he was unable to buy the needed saddle horse for his horse-buying expeditions. This, however, he had got around by again using his head and killing 2 birds with 1 stone. He began breaking colts to drive, and in the driving drove them wherever he sought horses. So far all was well, but a new administration in San Francisco, pledged to economy, had stopped all street work. This meant the shutting down of the Lawndale quarry, which was one of the sources of supply for paving blocks. The 6 horses would not only be back on his hands, but he would have to feed them. How Mrs. Paul, Gao Yum and Chan Kai were to be paid was beyond him. I guess we've bit off more'n we could chew, he admitted to Saxon. That night he was late in coming home but brought with him a radiant face. Saxon was no less radiant. It's all right, she greeted him, coming out to the barn where he was unhitching a tired but fractious colt. I've talked with all 3. They see the situation and are perfectly willing to let their wages stand a while. By another week I start Hazel and Hattie delivering vegetables. Then the money will pour in from the hotels and my books won't look so lopsided. And oh, Billy, you'd never guess. Old Gao Yum has a bank account. He came to me afterward. I guess he was thinking it over and offered to lend me $400. What do you think of that? That I ain't goin' to be too proud to borrow it off if he is a chink. He's a white one and maybe I'll need it. Because you see, well, you can't guess what I've been up to since I seen you this mornin'. I've been so busy I ain't had a bite to eat. Using your head, she laughed. You can call it that, he joined in her laughter. I've been spendin' money like water. But you haven't got any to spend, she objected. I've got credit in this valley, I'll let you know, he replied. And I sure strained it some this afternoon, now guess. A saddle horse. He roared with laughter, startling the colt, which tried to bolt and lifted him half off the ground by his grip on its frightened nose and neck. Oh, I mean real guessin', he urged, when the animal had dropped back to earth and stood regarding him with trembling suspicion. 2 saddle horses. Or you ain't got imagination, I'll tell you, you know Thearcroft. I bought his big wagon from for $60. I bought a wagon from the Kenwood blacksmith, so, but it'll do for $45. And I bought Ping's wagon, a peach, for $65. I could got it for $50 if he hadn't seen I wanted it bad. But the money, Saxon questioned faintly, you hadn't $100 left. Didn't I tell you I had credit? Well, I have, I stood 'em off for them wagons. I ain't spent a cent of cash money today except for a couple of long-distance switches. Then I bought 3 sets of work harness, their chain harness and second-hand, for $20 a set. I bought 'em from the fellow that's doin' the haulin' for the quarry. He don't need many more, and I rented 4 wagons from and 4 span of horses too, at $50 a day for each horse, and $50 a day for each wagon. That's $6 a day rent I gotta pay the 3 sets of spare harnesses for my 6 horses. Then, lemme see. Yep, I rented 2 barns in Glen Ellen, and I ordered 50 tons of hay and a carload of bran and barley from the store in Glenwood. You see, I gotta feed all them 14 horses and shoom and everything. Oh, sure, Pete, I've went some. I hired 7 men to go driven for me at $2 a day, and ouch, Jehoshaphat, what you doin'? No, Saxon said gravely, having pinched him, you're not dreaming. She felt his pulse and forehead, not a sign of fever. She sniffed his breath. And you've not been drinking. Go on, tell me the rest of this, whatever it is. Ain't you satisfied? No, I want more, I want all. All right, but I just want you to know first that the boss I used to work for in Oakland ain't got nothin' on me. I'm some man of affairs if anybody should ride up on a vegetable wagon and ask you. Now I'm going to tell you, though I can't see why the Glen Ellen folks didn't beat me to it. I guess they was asleep. Nobody'd overlooked a thing like it in the city. You see, it was like this. You know that fancy brickyard they're gettin', ready to start for mackin' extra special fire brick for inside walls. Well, here was I worryin' about the 6 horses comin' back on my hands, earnin' me nothin' and eatin' me into the poorhouse. I had to get 'em work somehow, and I remembered the brickyard. I drove the colt down and talked with that Jap chemist who's been doin' the experimentin'. Gee, they was foremen lookin' over the ground and everything gettin' ready to hum. I looked over the lay and studied it. Then I drove up to where they're openin' the clay pit. You know that fine, white chalky stuff we saw 'em borin' out just outside the 140 acres with the 3 knolls. It's a downhill hole, a mile, and 2 horses can do it easy. In fact, their hardest job'll be haulin' the empty wagons up to the pit. Then I tied the colt and went to figurin'. The Jap professor told me the manager and the other big guns of the company was comin' up on the mornin' train. I wasn't shoutin' things out to anybody, but I just made myself into a committee of welcome. And when the train pulled in, there I was, extendin' the glad hand of the burg, likewise the glad hand of a guy you used to know in Oakland once, a third-rate dub prizefighter by the name of Lemmy C. Yep, I got it right. Big Bill Roberts was the name he used to sport, but now he's known as William Roberts ESQ. Well, as I was sayin', I gave him the glad hand and trailed along with him to the brickyard, and from the talk I could see things was doin'. Then I watched my chance and sprung my proposition. I was scared stiff all the time for maybe the teamin' was already arranged, but I knew it wasn't when they asked for my figures. I had 'em by heart, and I rattled 'em off, and the top guy took 'em down in his notebook. We're goin' into this big and at once, he says, lookin' at me sharp. What kind of an outfit you got, Mr. Roberts? Me, with only Hazel and Hattie, and them too small for heavy teamin'. I can slap 14 horses and 7 wagons onto the job at the jump, says I, and if you want more I'll get 'em, that's all. Give us 15 minutes to consider, Mr. Roberts, he says. Sure, says I, important as all hell, me, but a couple of other things first. I want a 2-year contract and them figures all depends on one thing, otherwise they don't go. What's that, he says. The dump, says I, here we are on the ground, and I might as well show you. And I did. I showed Em where I'd lose out if they stuck to their plan, on account of the dip down and pull up to the dump. All you gotta do, I says, is to build the bunkers 50 feet over, throw the road around the rim of the hill, and make about 70 or 80 feet of elevated bridge. Say, Saxon, that kind of talk got 'em. It was straight, only they'd been thinkin' about bricks while I was only thinkin' of teamin'. I guess they was all of half an hour considerin', and I was almost as miserable waitin' as when I waited for you to say yes after I asked you. I went over the figures, calculatin' what I could throw off if I had to. You see, I'd given it to 'em stiff, regular city prices, and I was prepared to trim down. Then they come back. Prices ought to be lower in the country, says the top guy. Nope, I says. This is a wine grape valley. It don't raise enough hay and feed for its own animals. It has to be shipped in from the San Joaquin Valley. Why, I can buy hay and feed cheaper in San Francisco, laid down, than I can here and haul it myself. And that struck 'em hard. It was true and they knew it, but say, if they'd asked about wages for drivers and about horseshoeing prices, I'd had to come down. Because you see, they ain't no Teamsters union in the country and no horseshoers union, and rent is low, and them 2 items come a whole lot cheaper. This afternoon I got a word bargain with the blacksmith across from the post office, and he takes my whole bunch and throws off 25 cents on each shoe-in, though it's on the QT, but they didn't think to ask, Bain too full of bricks. Billy felt in his breast pocket, drew out a legal-looking document, and handed it to Saxon. There it is, he said, the contract full of all the agreements, prices and penalties. I saw Mr. Hale downtown and showed it to Em. He says it's okay and say, then I lit out. All over town, Kenwood, Lawndale, everywhere, everybody, everything. The quarry teamin' finishes Friday of this week. And I take the whole outfit and start Wednesday of next week haulin' lumber for the buildin's, and bricks for the kilns, and all the rest. And when they're ready for the clay, I'm the boy that'll give it to them. But I ain't told you the best yet. I couldn't get the switch right away from Kenwood to Lawndale, and while I waited I went over my figures again. You couldn't guess it in a million years. I'd made a mistake in addition somewhere and soaked 'em 10%, more'n I'd expected. Talk about findin' money. Any time you want them couple of extra men to help out with the vegetables, say the word. They were goin' to have to pinch the next couple of months, and go ahead and borrow that 400 from Gow Yum, and tell him you'll pay 8% interest and that we won't want it more in 3 or 4 months. When Billy got away from Saxon's arms, he started leading the colt up and down to cool it off. He stopped so abruptly that his back collided with the colt's nose, and there was a lively minute of rearing and plunging. Saxon waited, for she knew a fresh idea had struck Billy. "Say," he said, "do you know anything about bank accounts and draw-in checks?" Chapter 21. It was on a bright June morning that Billy told Saxon to put on her riding clothes to try out a saddle horse. "Not until after 10 o'clock, she said. "By that time I'll have the wagon off on a second trip." Despite the extent of the business she had developed, her executive ability and system gave her much spare time. She could call on the Hales, which was ever a delight, especially now that the Hastings were back and that Clara was often at her aunt's. In this congenial atmosphere Saxon burgeoned. She had begun to read with understanding, and she had time for her books, for work on her pretties, and for Billy, whom she accompanied on many expeditions. Billy was even busier than she, his work being more scattered and diverse, and as well he kept his eye on the home barn and horses which Saxon used. In truth, he had become a man of affairs, though Mrs. Mortimer had gone over his accounts with an eagle eye on the expense column, discovering several minor leaks, and finally, aided by Saxon, bullied him into keeping books. Each night after supper, he and Saxon posted their books. Afterward, in the big Morris chair he had insisted on buying early in the days of his brickyard contract, Saxon would creep into his arms and strum on the ukulele, or they would talk long about what they were doing and planning to do. Now it would be, "I'm mixin' up in politics, Saxon. It pays. You bet it pays. If by next spring I ain't got a half a dozen teams workin' on the roads and pullin' down the county money, it's me back to Oakland and askin' the boss for a job." Or Saxon, "They're really starting that new hotel between Caliant and Eldridge, and there's some talk of a big sanitarium back in the hills." Or it would be, "Billy, now that you've piped that acre, you've just got to let me have it for my vegetables. I'll rent it from you. I'll take your own estimate for all the alfalfa you can raise on it, and pay you full market price less the cost of growing it." "It's all right, take it." Billy suppressed a sigh. "Besides, I'm too busy to fool with it now." Which prevarication was barefaced, by virtue of his having just installed the ram and piped the land. "It will be the wisest, Billy," she soothed, for she knew his dream of land spaciousness was stronger than ever. "You don't want to fool with an acre. There's that 140. We'll buy it yet if old Chavan ever dies. Besides, it really belongs to Madrono Ranch. The two together were the original quarter section." "I don't wish no man's death," Billy grumbled. "But he ain't gettin' no good out of it, overpasturin' it with a lot of scrub animals. I've sized it up every inch of it. They's at least 40 acres in the 3 cleared fields, with water in the hills behind to beat the band. The horse feed I could raise on it'd take your breath away. Then they's at least 50 acres I could run my brood mares on, pasture mixed up with trees and steep places and such. The other 50's just thick woods and pretty places and wild game. And that old adobe barn's all right. With a new roof it'd shelter any amount of animals in bad weather. Look at me now rentin' that measly pasture back of Ping's just to run my restin animals. They could run in the 140 if I only had it. I wonder if Chavan would lease it." Or, less ambitious, Billy would say, "I got a skin over to Petaluma tomorrow, Saxon. They's an auction on the Atkinson Ranch and maybe I can pick up some bargains." "More horses." "Ain't I got 2 teams haulin' lumber for the new winery? And Barney's got a bad shoulder sprain. He'll have to lay off a long time if he's to get it in shape. And Bridget ain't ever goin' to do a tap of work again. I can see that stickin' out. I've doctored her and doctored her. She's fooled the vet too. And some of the other horses has got to take a rest. That span of greys is showin' the hard work, and the big roan's goin' loco. Everybody thought it was his teeth, but it ain't. It's straight loco. It's money in pocket to take care of your animals, and horses is the delicatest things on 4 legs. Sometime, if I can ever see my way to it, I'm goin' to ship a carload of mules from Colusa County. Big, heavy ones, you know. They'd sell like hot cakes in the valley here, them I didn't want for myself." Or in lighter vein, Billy, "By the way, Saxon, talkin' of accounts, what do you think Hazel and Hattie is worth? Fair market price." "Why, I'm askin' you." "Well, say what you paid for them, $300. Billy considered deeply. "They're worth a whole lot more, but let it go at that. And now, gettin' back to accounts, suppose you write me a check for $300. "Oh, Robert. You can't show me. Why, Saxon, when I let you have grain and hay from my carloads, don't you give me a check for it? And you know how you're stuck on keepin' your accounts down to the penny," he teased. "If you're any kind of a business woman, you just gotta charge your business with them 2 horses. I ain't had the use of 'em since I don't know when." "But the colts will be yours," she argued. "Besides, I can't afford brood mares in my business. In almost no time now Hazel and Hattie will have to be taken off from the wagon, they're too good for it anyway. And you keep your eyes open for a pair to take their place. I'll give you a check for that pair but no commission. All right, Billy conceded. Hazel and Hattie come back to me, but you can pay me rent for the time you did use 'em. If you make me, I'll charge you board, she threatened. And if you charge me board, I'll charge you interest for the money I've stuck into this shebang. You can't, Saxon laughed, it's community property. He grunted spasmodically, as if the breath had been knocked out of him. Straight on the solar plexus, he said, and me down for the count. But say, them sweet words, ain't they community property? He rolled them over and off his tongue with keen relish. And when we got married, the top of our ambition was a steady job and some rags and sticks of furniture all paid up and half worn out. We wouldn't have had any community property only for you. What nonsense! What could I have done by myself? You know very well that you earned all the money that started us here. You paid the wages of Gao Yum and Chan Kai and old Huey and Mrs. Paul, and why, you've done it all. She drew her two hands caressingly across his shoulders and down along his great biceps muscles. That's what did it, Billy. Or hell, it's your head that done it. What was my muscles good for with no head to run sluggin' scabs, beatin' up lodgers and crookin' the elbow over a bar. The only sensible thing my head ever done was when it run me into you. Honest to God, Saxon, you've been the mackin' of me. Or hell, Billy, she mimicked in the way that delighted him. Where would I have been if you hadn't taken me out of the laundry? I couldn't take myself out. I was just a helpless girl. I'd have been there yet if it hadn't been for you. Mrs. Mortimer had $5,000, but I had you. A woman ain't got the chance to help herself that a man has, he generalized. I'll tell you what, it took the two of us. It's been teamwork. We've run in span. If we'd a run single, you might still be in the laundry, and if I was lucky, I'd be still driven team by the day and sportin' around to cheap dances. Saxon stood under the father of all madronos, watching Hazel and Hattie go out the gate, the full vegetable wagon behind them. When she saw Billy ride in, leading a sorrel mare from whose silken coat the sun flashed golden lights. 4-year-old high life a handful but no vicious tricks, Billy chanted as he stopped beside Saxon. Skin like tissue paper, mouth like silk, but kill the toughest bronco ever foaled. Look at them lungs and nostrils. They call her Ramona, some Spanish name, sired by Morlita out a genuine Morgan stock. And they will sell her, Saxon gasped, standing with hands clasped in inarticulate delight. That's what I brought her to show you for. But how much must they want for her? Was Saxon's next question, so impossible did it seem that such an amazement of horseflesh could ever be hers. That ain't your business, Billy answered brusquely. The brickyard's payin' for her, not the vegetable ranch. She's yourn at the word. What d'ye say? I'll tell you in a minute. Saxon was trying to mount, but the animal danced nervously away. Hold on till I tie, Billy said. She ain't skirt broke, that's the trouble. Saxon tightly gripped reins and mane, stepped with spurred foot on Billy's hand, and was lifted lightly into the saddle. She's used to spurs, Billy called after. Spanish broke, so don't check her quick, come in gentle and talk to her. She's high life, you know. Saxon nodded, dashed out the gate and down the road, waved a hand to Clara Hastings as she passed the gate of Trillium Covert, and continued up Wild Water Canyon. When she came back, Ramona in a pleasant lather, Saxon rode to the rear of the house, past the chicken houses and the flourishing berry rows, to join Billy on the rim of the bench, where he sat on his horse in the shade, smoking a cigarette. Together they looked down through an opening among the trees to the meadow, which was a meadow no longer. With mathematical accuracy, it was divided into squares, oblongs, and narrow strips, which displayed sharply the 1,000 hues of green of a truck garden. Gao Yum and Chan Kai, under enormous Chinese grass hats, were planting green onions. Old Huey, hoe in hand, plodded along the main artery of running water, opening certain laterals, closing others. From the workshed beyond the barn, the strokes of a hammer told Saxon that Carlson was wire-binding vegetable boxes. Mrs. Paul's cheery soprano, lifted in a hymn, floated through the trees, accompanied by the whir of an egg beater. A sharp barking told where Possum still waged hysterical and baffled war on the Douglas squirrels. Billy took a long draw from his cigarette, exhaled the smoke, and continued to look down at the meadow. Saxon divined trouble in his manner. His rein hand was on the pommel, and her free hand went out and softly rested on his. Billy turned his slow gaze upon her mare's lather, seeming not to note it, and continued on to Saxon's face. Huh, he equivocated, as if waking up. Them San Leandro Portuguese ain't got nothin' on us when it comes to intensive farmin'. Look at that water runnin'. You know, it seems so good to me that sometimes I just want to get down on hands and knees and lap it all up myself. Oh, to have all the water you want in a climate like this, Saxon exclaimed. And don't be scared of it ever goin' back on you. If the rain's fooled you, there's Sonoma Creek alongside. All we gotta do is install a gasoline pump. But we'll never have to, Billy. I was talking with Redwood Thompson. He's lived in the valley since '53, and he says there's never been a failure of crops on account of drought. We always get our rain. Come on, let's go for a ride, he said abruptly. You've got the time. All right, if you'll tell me what's bothering you. He looked at her quickly. Nothin', he grunted. Yes, there is too. What's the difference? You'd know it sooner or later. You ought to see old Chavan. His face is that long he can't walk without bumpin' his knee on his chin. His gold mine's peterin' out. Gold mine. His clay pit, it's the same thing. He's gettin' 20 cents a yard for it from the brickyard. And that means the end of your teaming contract. Saxon saw the disaster in all its hugeness. What about the brickyard people? Worried to death, though they've kept secret about it. They've had men out punchin' holes all over the hills for a week, and that Jap chemist settin' up nights analyzin' the rubbish they've brought in. It's peculiar stuff, that clay, for what they want it for, and you don't find it everywhere. Them experts that reported on Chavan's pit made one hell of a mistake. Maybe they was lazy with their borin's. Anyway, they slipped up on the amount of clay they was in it. Now don't get to botherin'. It'd come out somehow. You can't do nothin'. But I can, Saxon insisted. We won't buy Ramona. You ain't got a thing to do with that, he answered. I'm buyin' her, and her price don't cut any figure alongside the big game I'm playin'. Of course I can always sell my horses, but that puts a stop to their mackin' money, and that brickyard contract was fat. But if you get some of them in on the road work for the county, she suggested. Oh, I got that in mind, and I'm keepin' my eyes open. There's a chance the quarry will start again, and the fellow that did that teamin' has gone to Puget Sound. And what if I have to sell out most of the horses? Here's you and the vegetable business. That's solid. We just don't go ahead so fast for a time, that's all. I ain't scared of the country anymore. I sized things up as we went along. They ain't a jerkburg we hit all the time on the road that I couldn't jump into and make a go. And now where do you want to ride? Chapter 22. They cantered out the gate, thundered across the bridge, and past Trillium Covert before they pulled in on the grade of Wild Water Canyon. Saxon had chosen her field on the big spur of Sonoma Mountains as the objective of their ride. Say I bumped into something big this mornin' when I was goin' to fetch Ramona, Billy said, the clay pit trouble banished for the time. You know the 140, I passed young Chavan along the road, and I don't know why, just for ducks I guess, I up and asked him if he thought the old man would lease the 140 to me. And what do you think? He said the old man didn't own it. Was just leasin' it himself. That's how we was always seein' his cattle on it. It's a gouge into his land, for he owns everything on 3 sides of it. Next I met Ping. He said Hilliard owned it and was willin' to sell, only Chavan didn't have the price. Then comin' back I looked in on Payne. He's quit blacksmithin', his back's hurtin' from a kick, and just startin' in for real estate. Sure, he said Hilliard would sell, and had already listed the land with Chavan's overpastured it, and Hilliard won't give 'em another lease. When they had climbed out of Wild Water Canyon, they turned their horses about and halted on the rim where they could look across at the 3 densely wooded knolls in the midst of the desired 140. We'll get it yet, Saxon said. Sure we will, Billy agreed with careless certitude. I've been lookin' over the big adobe barn again, just the thing for a raft of horses, and a new roof'll be cheaper 'en I thought, though neither Chavan or me'll be in the market to buy it right away, with the clay pinchin' out. When they reached Saxon's field, which they had learned was the property of Redwood Thompson, they tied the horses and entered it on foot. The hay just cut was being raked by Thompson, who hallooed a greeting to them. It was a cloudless, windless day, and they sought refuge from the sun in the woods beyond. They encountered a dim trail. It's a cow trail, Billy declared. I bet they's a teeny pasture tucked away somewhere in them trees. Let's follow it. A quarter of an hour later, several 100 feet up the side of the spur, they emerged on an open, grassy space of bare hillside. Most of the 140, 2 miles away, lay beneath them, while they were level with the tops of the 3 knolls. Billy paused to gaze upon the much-desired land, and Saxon joined him. What is that? She asked, pointing toward the knolls. Up the little canyon to the left of it, there on the farthest knoll, right under that spruce that's leaning over. What Billy saw was a white scar on the canyon wall. It's one on me, he said, studying the scar. I thought I knew every inch of that land, but I never seen that before. Why, I was right in there at the head of the canyon the first part of the winter. It's awful wild, walls of the canyon like the sides of a steeple and covered with thick woods. What is it? She asked. A slide. Must be brought down by the heavy rains. If I don't miss my guess. Billy broke off, forgetting in the intensity with which he continued to look. Hilliard'll sell for 30 an acre, he began again disconnectedly. Good land, bad land, and all just as it runs, 30 an acre. That's 4,200. Payne's new at real estate, and I'll make him split his commission and get the easiest terms ever. We can reborrow that 400 from Gao Yum, and I can borrow money on my horses and wagons. Are you going to buy it today? Saxon teased. She scarcely touched the edge of his thought. He looked at her as if he had heard, then forgot her the next moment. Head works, he mumbled. Head work, if I don't put over a hot one. He started back down the cow trail, recollected Saxon, and called over his shoulder. Come on, let's hustle. I want to ride over and look at that. So rapidly did he go down the trail and across the field that Saxon had no time for questions. She was almost breathless from her effort to keep up with him. What is it? She begged as he lifted her to the saddle. Maybe it's all a joke, I'll tell you about it afterward, he put her off. They galloped on the levels, trotted down the gentler slopes of road, and not until on the steep descent of Wild Water Canyon did they rein to a walk. Billy's preoccupation was gone, and Saxon took advantage to broach a subject which had been on her mind for some time. Clara Hastings told me the other day that they're going to have a house party. The Hazards are to be there, and the Halls and Roy Blanchard. She looked at Billy anxiously. At the mention of Blanchard, his head had tossed up as to a bugle call. Slowly, a whimsical twinkle began to glint up through the cloudy blue of his eyes. It's a long time since you told any man he was standing on his foot, she ventured slyly. Billy began to grin sheepishly. Oh, that's all right, he said in mock lordly fashion. Roy Blanchard can come. I'll let all that was a long time ago. Besides, I'm too busy to fool with such things. He urged his horse on at a faster walk, and as soon as the slope lessened broke into a trot. At Trillium Covert they were galloping. You'll have to stop for dinner first, Saxon said, as they neared the gate of Madrona Ranch. You stop, he answered. I don't want no dinner. But I want to go with you, she pleaded. What is it? I don't dast tell you. You go on in and get your dinner. Not after that, she said. Nothing can keep me from coming along now. Half a mile farther on they left the highway, passed through a patent gate which Billy had installed, and crossed the fields on a road which was coated thick with chalky dust. This was the road that led to Chavon's clay pit. The 140 lay to the west. 2 wagons in a cloud of dust came into sight. Your teams, Billy, cried Saxon. Think of it, just by the use of the head, earning your money while you're riding around with me. Makes me ashamed to think how much cash money each one of them teams is bringin' me in every day, he acknowledged. They were turning off from the road toward the bars which gave entrance to the 140, when the driver of the foremost wagon hallooed and waved his hand. They drew in their horses and waited. The big roans broke loose, the driver said as he stopped beside them. Clean crazy loke, bitten, squealin', stricken, kickin', kicked clean out of the harness like it was paper, bit a chunk out of Baldy the size of a saucer and wound up by breakin' his own hind leg. Liveliest 15 minutes I ever seen. Sure it's broke, Billy demanded sharply. Sure thing. Well, after you unload, drive around by the other barn and get Ben. He's in the corral. Tell Matthews to be easy with and get a gun. Sammy's got one, you'll have to see to the big roan. I ain't got time now. Why couldn't Matthews come along with you for Ben? You'd save time. Oh, he's just stickin' around waitin', the driver answered. He reckoned I could get Ben. And lose time, eh? Well, get a move on. That's the way of it, Billy growled to Saxon as they rode on. No salve, no head. One man settin' down and holdin' his hands while another team drives out its way doin' what he oughta done. That's the trouble with $2 a day men. With $2 a day heads, Saxon said quickly. What kind of heads do you expect for $2? That's right too, Billy acknowledged the hit. If they had better heads they'd be in the cities like all the rest of the better men. And the better men are a lot of dummies too. They don't know the big chances in the country or you couldn't hold 'em from it. Billy dismounted, took the 3 bars down, led his horse through, then put up the bars. "When I get this place there'll be a gate here," he announced. "Pay for itself in no time. It's the 1,001 little things like this that count up big when you put them together." He sighed contentedly. "I never used to think about such things, but when we shook Oakland I began to wise up. It was them San Leandro Portuguese that gave me my first eye-opener. I'd been asleep before that." They skirted the lower of the 3 fields where the ripe hay stood uncut. Billy pointed with eloquent disgust to a break in the fence, slovenly repaired, and on to the standing grain much trampled by cattle. "Them's the things," he criticized. "Old style. And look how thin that crop is and the shallow ploughin'. Scrub cattle, scrub seed, scrub farmin'. Chavon's worked it for 8 years now, and never rested it once, never put anything in for what he took out, except the cattle into the stubble the minute the hay was on." In a pasture glade farther on, they came upon a bunch of cattle. "Look at that bull, Saxon. Scrub's no name for it. They oughta be a state law against lettin' such animals exist. No wonder Chavon's that land poor he's had to sink all his clay-pit earnin's into taxes and interest. He can't make his land pay. Take this 140. Anybody with the salve can just rake silver dollars a fennet. I'll show 'em." They passed the big adobe barn in the distance. "A few dollars at the right time would saved hundreds on that roof," Billy commented. "Well, anyway, I won't be payin' for any improvements when I buy, and I'll tell you another thing. This ranch is full of water, and if Glen Ellen ever grows they'll have to come to see me for their water supply." Billy knew the ranch thoroughly and took shortcuts through the woods by way of cattle paths. Once he reined in abruptly and both stopped. Confronting them a dozen paces away was a half-grown red fox. For half a minute with beady eyes the wild thing studied them, with twitching sensitive nose reading the messages of the air. Then, velvet-footed, it leapt aside and was gone among the trees. "The son of a gun," Billy ejaculated. As they approached Wild Water, they rode out into a long, narrow meadow. In the middle was a pond. "Natural reservoir when Glen Ellen begins to buy water," Billy said. "See, down at the lower end there. Wouldn't cost anything hardly to throw a dam across. And I can pipe in all kinds of hill drip. And water's going to be money in this valley not 1,000 years from now. And all the ginks and boobs and dubs and gazabos poundin', they're ear deado and not seein' it comin'. And surveyors working up the valley for an electric road from Sausalito with a branch up Napa Valley." They came to the rim of Wild Water Canyon. Leaning far back in their saddles, they slid the horses down a steep declivity through big spruce woods to an ancient and all but obliterated trail. "They cut this trail way back in the 50s, Billy explained. "I only found it by accident, then I asked Pop yesterday. He was born in the valley. He said it was a fake minin rush across from Petaluma. The gamblers got it up and they must drawn 1,000 suckers. You see that flat there and the old stumps, that's where the camp was. They set the tables up under the trees. The flat used to be bigger but the creek's eaten into it. Pop said they was a couple of killins and 1 lynchin'. Lying low against their horses' necks, they scrambled up a steep cattle trail out of the canyon and began to work across rough country toward the knolls. "Say, Saxon, you're always lookin' for something pretty. I'll show you what'll make your hair stand up, soon as we get through this manzanita." Never in all their travels had Saxon seen so lovely a vista as the one that greeted them when they emerged. The dim trail lay like a rambling red shadow cast on the soft forest floor by the great redwoods and overarching oaks. It seemed as if all local varieties of trees and vines had conspired to weave the leafy roof: maples, big madronos and laurels, and lofty tanbark oaks, scaled and wrapped and interwound with wild grape and flaming poison oak. Saxon drew Billy's eyes to a mossy bank of 5-finger ferns. All slopes seemed to meet to form this basin and colossal forest bower. Underfoot the floor was spongy with water. An invisible streamlet whispered under broad fronded breaks. On every hand opened tiny vistas of enchantment, where young redwoods grouped still and stately about fallen giants, shoulder-high to the horses, moss-covered and dissolving into mold. At last, after another quarter of an hour, they tied their horses on the rim of the narrow canyon that penetrated the wilderness of the knolls. Through a rift in the trees, Billy pointed to the top of the leaning spruce. "It's right under that," he said. "We'll have to follow up the bed of the creek. They ain't no trail, though you'll see plenty of deer paths crossin' the creek. You'll get your feet wet." Saxon laughed her joy and held on close to his heels, splashing through pools, crawling hand and foot up the slippery faces of water-worn rocks, and worming under trunks of old fallen trees. "They ain't no real bedrock in the whole mountain," Billy elucidated, "so the stream cuts deeper and deeper and that keeps the sides cavin' in. They're as steep as they can be without falling down. A little farther up the canyon ain't much more'n a crack in the ground, but a mighty deep one if anybody should ask you. You can spit across it and break your neck in it. The climbing grew more difficult, and they were finally halted in a narrow cleft by a drift jam. You wait here, Billy directed, and lying flat squirmed on through crashing brush. Saxon waited till all sound had died away. She waited 10 minutes longer, then followed by the way Billy had broken. Where the bed of the canyon became impassable, she came upon what she was sure was a deer path that skirted the steep side, and was a tunnel through the close greenery. She caught a glimpse of the overhanging spruce, almost above her head on the opposite side, and emerged on a pool of clear water in a clay-like basin. This basin was of recent origin, having been formed by a slide of earth and trees. Across the pool arose an almost sheer wall of white. She recognized it for what it was and looked about for Billy. She heard him whistle and looked up. 200 feet above, at the perilous top of the white wall, he was holding on to a tree trunk. The overhanging spruce was nearby. "I can see the little pasture back of your field," he called down. "No wonder nobody ever piped this off. The only place they could see it from is that speck of pasture. And you saw it first. Wait till I come down and tell you all about it. I didn't dast before." It required no shrewdness to guess the truth. Saxon knew this was the precious clay required by the brickyard. Billy circled wide of the slide and came down the canyon wall, from tree to tree, as descending a ladder. "Ain't it a peach?" he exulted as he dropped beside her. "Just look at it, hidden away under 4 feet of soil where nobody could see it, and just waitin' for us to hit the valley of the moon. Then it up and slides a piece of the skin off so as we can see it." "Is it the real clay?" Saxon asked anxiously. "You bet your sweet life. I've handled too much of it not to know it in the dark. Just rub a piece between your fingers. Like that. Why, I could tell by the taste of it. I've eaten enough of the dust of the teams. Here's where our fun begins. Why, you know we've been working our heads off since we hit this valley. Now we're on Easy Street." "But you don't own it," Saxon objected. "Well, you won't be 100 years old before I do. Straight from here I hike to Payne and bind the bargain. An option, you know, while title's searchin' and I'm raisin' money. We'll borrow that 400 back again from Gow Yum, and I'll borrow all I can get on my horses and wagons and Hazel and Hattie, and everything that's worth a cent, and then I get the deed with a mortgage on it to Hilliard for the balance. And then, it's talk and candy from a baby. I'll contract with the brickyard for 20 cents a yard, maybe more. They'll be crazy with joy when they see it. Don't need any borin's. They's nearly 200 feet of it exposed up and down, the whole knoll's clay with a skin of soil over it." "But you'll spoil all the beautiful canyon hauling out the clay," Saxon cried with alarm. "Nope, only the knoll. The road'll come in from the other side. It'll be only half a mile to Chavon's pit. I'll build the road and charge steeper teamin', or the brickyard can build it and I'll team for the same rate as before. And 20 cents a yard pourin' in all profit from the jump. I'll sure have to buy more horses to do the work." They sat hand in hand beside the pool and talked over the details. "Say, Saxon," Billy said after a pause had fallen, "sing Harvest Days, won't you?" And when she had complied, "The first time you sung that song for me was comin' home from the picnic on the train." "The very first day we met each other," she broke in. "What did you think about me that day?" "Why, what I've thought ever since, that you was made for me. I thought that right at the jump in the first waltz. And what do you think of me?" "Oh, I wondered, and before the first waltz too, when we were introduced and shook hands, I wondered if you were the man. Those were the very words that flashed into my mind. Is he the man?" "And I kinda looked a little some good to you?" he queried. "I thought so, and my eyesight has always been good." "Say," Billy went off at a tangent, "by next winter, with everything hummin' and shipshape, what's the matter with us mackin' a visit to Carmel? It'll be slack time for you with the vegetables, and I'll be able to afford a foreman." Saxon's lack of enthusiasm surprised him. "What's wrong?" he demanded quickly. With downcast, demurest eyes and hesitating speech, Saxon said, "I did something yesterday without asking your advice, Billy." He waited. "I wrote to Tom," she added with an air of timid confession. Still he waited, for he knew not what. "I asked him to ship up the old chest of drawers, my mother's, you remember, that we stored with him." "Huh, I don't see anything I'll tell you the way about that," Billy said with relief. "We need the chest, don't we? And we can afford to pay the freight on it, can't we?" "You are a dear stupid man, that's what you are. Don't you know what is in the chest?" He shook his head, and what she added was so soft that it was almost a whisper. "The baby clothes." No, he exclaimed. Truth. Sure. She nodded her head, her cheeks flooding with quick colour. It's what I wanted, Saxon, more than anything else in the world. I've been thinking a whole lot about it lately, ever since we hit the valley, he went on brokenly, and for the first time she saw tears unmistakable in his eyes. But after all I'd done and the hell I'd raised and everything, I never urged you or said a word about it, but I wanted it. Oh, I wanted it like I want you now. His open arms received her, and the pool in the heart of the canyon knew a tender silence. Saxon felt Billy's finger laid warningly on her lips. Guided by his hand, she turned her head back, and together they gazed far up the side of the knoll where a doe and a spotted fawn looked down upon them from a tiny open space between the trees.